and welcome to BrightStreamTV. My name is William Everhart, and I will be your host for this episode. And in this episode, we're going to cover Adobe Premiere. Now, this is going to be a sprint course in which we're going to take you from start to finish for a complete project. We won't dive into all the minutia of all of the controls and all that sort of stuff. We're going to give you just the information you need to create a great video using whatever media you have to happen. How about we get started with a little bit of Premiere? All right, so today we're going to be talking about Adobe Premiere, and more importantly, we're going to be talking about the 2015 edition. Now, some of the topics that are going to be in here will actually work in earlier versions of Premiere, but for the most part, that's what I'm going to demo today, is the 2015 edition. So what are some of the topics for today? Well, first we're going to talk about the interface itself. I'm going to get you familiar with navigating around this crazy Adobe interface. If you've worked with some of the other Adobe tools, it's similar but not the same. And so we want to make sure that we have a good groundwork of where to go to find the panels and the tools that we need. Next, we're going to create a Premiere project. We'll take a look at importing and organizing our various media clips. We're going to review that media. Then we're going to start working with sequences, and this is where we will actually incorporate the media into the project. We'll take a look at some basic editing. We'll add some transitions and perhaps some effects to change the look and the feel of our media. And then finally, we're going to show you how to save your projects and then how to export it so that you can use it in other applications. So as you can see, we have a lot to cover here in this sprint course. But like I said, we're going to take you from start to finish with a single cohesive project. Now, there are some files that you can download. They're free for you to use, and they are available just below my video screen here. There's a button there where you can download it, and you want to look for the Premiere Pro 2015 Sprint zip file there, and you can download that. Follow along if you like. There will be both starting files and ending files in there. So if you can't keep up with the pace, and sometimes we have to move a little quicker pace here just to get it all in the sprint course, that's okay, because for each chapter, I have finished the project for you. So you can just pick up at the next chapter. Now, if you just want to sit back and relax and enjoy the show, by all means, go right ahead. You can still download those files and use them and play around with them at another time. Okay? So let's dive right on into our first chapter here. All right, so lesson one. As I said, we want to talk about the interface. So what is it we're going to do here? Well, we're going to learn how to navigate this maze of an Adobe interface here. It's really not that bad once you understand where things are. We're going to show you how to switch between different workspaces. And I'm going to show you how to customize a workspace. And if you're wondering, well, what exactly is a workspace? I'm going to define that as well. And then I'm finally going to show you how to save your custom workspace. So I'm going to dive right on over into Adobe Premiere. So here I have the welcome screen. Once again, this is the 2015 edition, so mine may look a little different than yours. But whenever you launch Adobe Premiere, you will be presented with this welcome screen. It is adjustable. I'm going to adjust the height of this just a little bit, and I can reposition this a little bit. So in here we have some little tabs across the top. There is a Create tab, and this is where I'm going to spend most of my time here. It allows me to create new projects. It allows me to open recent projects, and it also allows me to sync to my Creative Cloud. So for our purposes here, just to take a look at the interface, I'm going to choose to open a Premiere project. Now you can see here I have an interface basics in my open recent. Now you won't have that. So what you will have though is an open command. Now this is just a standard open command. So if I just click on this, it's going to give me a dialog box where I can go and search for the Premiere project that I want to open. So I've downloaded those files and I have them here in my little folder. Open that up. And when I do, I have various lessons here. So I'm going to open up this lessons folder. And inside of lesson 1, this is my Premiere project. Okay? It is suffixed with a .prproj, Premiere Project file. I'll select that and choose Open. Now this is a finished project, and so I chose this particular one so that we can see all the bells and whistles and kind of see what it is that we're trying to build here. Now, you also may see this, missing renderer. This object was last used with Mercury Playback Engine GPU acceleration, blah, blah, blah. Basically, it's telling me that when I created this project, I was using a different computer, and it had what Adobe would consider an acceptable or a usable video card, one that they have cleared as good to use in this scenario. In this case, it may not have. So this computer that I'm working on, it may not have that. So you may get this. Either way, your project will open. Doesn't matter, but if you do have an Adobe certified video card, things will be a lot faster for you when it comes to making these edits. It's not absolutely necessary, but it certainly does make things a little quicker. So there's nothing I can do here other than just tell this to OK and dismiss that. It'll go ahead and open my project. And now you may also run into this issue. Now it's saying that it's missing some media. So this just means that when the file was originally created, there were some paths, and now it cannot find those paths. It's not really a big deal for our purposes here. So I'm going to just tell it to offline all of those. And then my screen looks a little different than yours, I'm sure. What's happening here is this is part of this workspace here. So I have this little program window here, and it's just kind of taking over. And what's happening here is each of these projects remembers the settings that were used the last time it was open. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dismiss that window. And then let's take a look at this interface. So the first thing I want to do is I want to reset to a more common workspace. Now, workspaces are basically the arrangement of all of these panels that we can see here. So if you look at my screen, you can see that I have my division of my screen in roughly 4 different quadrants. In the upper left-hand corner, I have a panel here, and it says Effect Controls. There's also a little tab up here at the top. It's kind of grayed out. It says Audio Clip Mixer. If I click on that, we'll see that. So these are panels, and they're actually stacked on top of each other. If you've used other Adobe applications, this will be very familiar to you. These little panels are grouped together. So in the upper left-hand corner, I have a set of panels. In the lower left-hand corner, I have another set of panels. Once again, I can kind of browse through these. One additional feature that we have here is a small little chevron here to the right. I'm in the lower left-hand corner of my screen, and there's this small little chevron here that is telling me, hey, there are more panels in this particular panel group. And so if I click on this, I can see, oh, there's my effects, markers, and history. So all of these are in here as well. Okay. I have a little tool panel strip right here in the middle, bottom. I have, this is a timeline area here. And in the upper right-hand corner, I have one of my monitors, in this case, a source monitor. So this is kind of a basic configuration, but all of the positioning of these panels, this workspace, if you will, was part of this project. So the last time this project was open, I had dual monitors open, so I had my program monitor on a different monitor. And now that I'm working with one monitor, things are all just kind of out of sorts. So one of the first things we want to do is just reset this workspace. And so what I'll do is I'll come up here to the window menu. And one of the first options under the window menu is Workspaces. Now what Adobe has done for you is created several different workspaces. And you can see here that I have assembly, audio, color, editing, effects, blah, 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 blah. So there's different little workspaces here that you can use. And to just use one of them or to switch to one of them, all you have to do is just click on it. So let's say I want to switch to the audio workspace. it reorients my screen here. It moves the panels around. In fact, it also closes and opens other panels. So not only does it move them around, it may close some of the other panels that I had open and yet open some ones that I did not have open. Really, really cool. Now in the 2015 edition of Adobe Premiere, they've added an extra little panel, and it's really just a little ribbon. It's a little tiny strip here across the very top, and you can actually see those various workspaces listed here. Here's assembly, editing, color, effects, and then of course what we're on, audio. And once again, there's another little chevron here. And so anytime you see these chevrons, it means there are more items. So there's actually another little workspace available to me. But at any time, you can always go to the window menu and you can go to Workspaces. Now I'm going to go back to that editing workspace. Now this is my favorite workspace. So I'm going to switch back to this. In the lower right-hand corner, I get a little missing font dialog here. This is once again a new feature of the 2015. These little warnings that will pop up. For the most part here, I'm just going to dismiss these. And now that I'm back to this workspace, I want to reset it to the factory defaults because this workspace has been customized a little bit. So I go up to the window menu, I go back to Workspaces, and it says that I'm working on the editing workspace. And then I want to choose Reset to Saved Layout. Okay. So now this is the actual factory default of the editing workspace. And this comes directly from Adobe. All right. I'm going to go back to that window menu just one more time and point something else out. If I go to Window and Workspaces, there is an option right here. It's on by default. It's called Import Workspace from Projects. And that's exactly what happened to me here. When I opened this project, it went ahead and opened that custom workspace along with the project. So if you don't want that type of behavior, you can certainly select this to uncheck it, and then that won't happen again. All right, awesome. So now I have, once again, basically 4 major areas on my screen. I have 4 basic groupings, if you will, of panels. In the upper left-hand corner, I have a source monitor. In the upper right-hand corner, I have a program monitor. And we're going to talk about these two a little later on and exactly what they do. In the lower left-hand corner, I have my project folder, I have a media browser, I have libraries. So basically all of my organizational tools here for my files are here. Okay. I have, of course, my little tool strip down the middle center. And then I have my timeline here, or my sequence. And this is where we can take a look at the assembly process for putting all these clips together. Finally, over on the far right-hand corner, there's another little strip. This is a little audio meter here that just lets me know as I am previewing my clips, I can actually look at the levels, the level of sound that's happening here. Okay? So what I'm going to do is here in the timeline, I'm just going to click somewhere in this panel. Now I'm trying not to click on any icon here in the panel. There's tons of little buttons and icons in here, so I'm just going to click up here near the top. And what that's going to do is it's going to activate that particular panel. Now you can see that everything's kind of crammed together here. It's got a lot of tight spaces here. Normally in a video production environment you would have either larger monitors or maybe even dual or triple monitors. And that's awesome if you have it. But what if you don't? What if you're working on location or you're maybe just working in a smaller environment here, you just have the one monitor? One thing that you can do to modify your workspace is to expose these panels one at a time. So if I have this panel here, the timeline, what is called right now introduction, that's the name of my sequence in this case. If I have that one highlighted, we can see a little blue ring around it there. And I hit the tilde key. That's the key just to the left of the 1 key at the top of your keyboard. It's just above the tab key, the tilde key. Whatever panel I am currently focused on will take over the screen. So you can see that my timeline panel here, or my sequence panel, has basically gone full screen. Now this gives me a lot more flexibility in being able to, manipulate things and seeing all the little details that are happening in this particular panel. If I hit that tilde key again, it'll jump back to its last known position. Now this is pretty awesome. So if I wanted to take a look at maybe my project panel, all I really have to do is move the mouse over the panel. You don't have to actually have the panel targeted. If your mouse cursor is over a particular panel, when you hit that tilde key, that particular panel is going to go full screen. So this is pretty nice. I'm going to hit the tilde key again, and that'll bring it back into its known position there in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. Now, another thing that you might want to do to customize your interface here is to move panels around. Okay? So I'm going to try moving some panels around here. I'm going to try to organize this in a way that I like to work with it. Now, these are just my personal preferences. You can set them up however you like. But one of the things that I might like to do is to move my effects from this lower left-hand corner to this upper left-hand corner. I want to group these together. So I know that my effects panel is in here. Now, how do I know that? Well, that's just from years of using the application. But what if I didn't know where my effects panel was? I'm new to it. I'm looking for the effects panel and I don't see it, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time just kind of poking around here trying to find it. If you ever lose a panel or just wonder where it is and you need to bring it to the front, if you will, go up to the window menu. In the window menu, you will see a listing of all of your panels. This is the only menu that is in alphabetical order as well. So if I'm looking for effects, it's very easy for me to come down here and say, effects. I'll click on that and it'll bring it forward. And as I said, it's down here in the lower left-hand corner. Now, these are different visual and audio effects that I can apply to my media. Well, I want to move that clip or that particular panel. I don't want it there. I want it somewhere else on the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the Effects tab. Okay? Right there at the top of the panel has a little tab and the name Effects. I'm just going to click and hold and then drag it. Now, as I begin to drag it, different areas on my screen are going to light up. This is where things get a little different with the Adobe interface compared to some of the other products. What it's telling me here is that it can position this panel either grouped with this other group of panels or to the left, above it, below it, or to the right of it. So that's pretty neat. I actually like this. It's very, very intuitive. Once you understand what it is, it makes a lot of sense. If I drag and I have a big purple box here over my source monitor and I release, then my effects panel is now grouped with my source monitor panel. Okay? So what if I didn't want that? Okay? I'm going to come back and I'm going to find this effects panel. It's up here with my source monitor now. What if I wanted the effects, let's say hanging out over here on the left? Well, if I were to grab the effects and then drag it to the left until I get this little polygonal shape here and release, you'll see that it has just slid everything to the right and it's made its own little home right here. Now I can also adjust the size of these panels. So in between panels, you will have little dark gray areas. Dragging those areas with the mouse, just click and drag, you can resize the panels. Okay. If there's a panel that you maybe don't want or just don't need, well, how about this metadata panel? Let's say that, I really don't use this a lot in my workflow, so let me get it out of the way. Let me simplify the interface. If I want to close a panel, you find the panel and look for the panel tab there at the top. There'll be three little lines to the right of that panel name. If you click on that, that reveals a panel menu. And here, I can choose to close that panel. There we go. And so now all of my other panels are still in here. Okay. They're all still grouped together there. Awesome. And this would be a custom workspace. Okay? So we've changed it. We've customized it a little bit. Now, what if we want to save this workspace? Maybe this is how we like to work. Okay? And so I would like to save this so that if someone else comes and works on my computer and they maybe move some panels around, I can always reset it back to the way I like to work. Okay? So that would be a custom workspace. And so we need to save this as a custom workspace. Now to do this, you make your changes, whatever those might be, and you come up to the window menu. In the window menu, you'll find Workspaces. And then in this list of the workspaces, there is a Save As New Workspace. So I'm going to select that. And just because I can typically spell it correctly, I'm going to use my first name and maybe an underscore, and this is my workspace, WS. Now you can have any kind of naming convention that you'd like, whatever works for you, but this is what I'll use here, and I'll tell this OK. So now I have my own custom workspace, and in the 2015 edition of Adobe Premiere Pro, you'll actually see it listed right up here. At the very top of my program monitor, you see there is my custom workspace right there. Awesome. Now what if I switch back to that editing workspace? Remember, that's the workspace that we started with. Well, it's listed right here in this top menu, right here, editing. And if I click on it, I don't see any changes. Well, that's right, because we started with this workspace and then manipulated it. So it still remembers all of those changes. So what I want to do is maybe reset this back to the factory defaults. And if you recall, we go to Window, Workspaces. I verify that I'm working in the editing workspace. This is the one I want to reset. And then I choose Reset to Saved Layout. And now we're back to the Adobe preset of the editing workspace. All right. So there you have it, the Adobe Premiere workspace. A little different, especially if you're a non-Adobe user, but even if you are an Adobe user like Photoshop or Illustrator and the other tools, it is still a little bit different than what we're used to seeing. A great interface, lots of tools, lots of buttons, and we're not going to cover all of those, but hopefully that gives you a better understanding of where to find some of the controls. We are definitely going to work with the major panel groups here, things like the effects and the timeline. We're going to use both monitors, the source and the program monitor, so you'll get plenty of practice with the major groups of panels here. All right, well, let's take a look at our next project here. We want to create a project from scratch. So at this point, we have just opened an existing project and taken a look. Let's see what happens if we want to create our own project. So first, maybe we should define what a Premiere project is, or a Premiere project file is. Well, it's really just a list of instructions on how to compose and edit your media clips. There's really not a lot going on within the project file itself, or perhaps there is a lot going on, but it's really, really small in size. So typically, the file sizes are really, really small. Now, the media files that you use, all of your clips that you take from your camera, now they can be quite large. And in this instance, those media files, they are referenced rather than embedded. So as you add media to your project file doesn't like explode or balloon up. It will get slightly larger, but certainly nowhere near the size of any of your media files. A project file can contain more than one show or media composition. So if you think about maybe a television show, there's multiple episodes. You may have a project file that is for season 1, and then another project file for season 2. You can certainly do things like that. Maybe you have an e-learning scenario here where you want to create various workflow videos or things like that. All of those videos can be contained in one project file. The individual shows, well, those are what we call sequences, and we'll get to that a little later on. As I said, the Premiere project file itself, really, really small in file size. It's just a list of instructions. The project file itself can be shared with multiple users, and we're going to talk about that setup here in just a moment. If you do have to share your components with other Premiere editors. You can also package these for archival storage. So once you're finished with your project, maybe you want to still keep all your source media and be able to reference it later, perhaps even edit it later. You can certainly do that. All right. So what is it we're going to do here? Well, first, we're going to talk about some of the storage options for your media and your project files. Then, we're actually going to create a project file based on what we've learned as far as the storage options. You've got lots of options when it comes to storing your media, and it really depends on your particular workflow. Now, if you're like me, I work independently. So for me, the best option are these external drives, and I have several of them here. I have some smaller drives here that I take in the field, so if I am on location and I am recording, I can pull the data from my camera and put it directly onto these drives. Now, I will also edit off of these drives as well. So they're relatively small, but so they're easy, convenient to move around with me when I'm on the go. Once I get back to a studio environment, or if I'm working directly in a studio environment, I might go with a larger drive. But all of these drives are connected directly to my computer, okay? Via FireWire or USB 3, whatever, eSATA, whatever your format of choice is, your transfer protocol. You definitely want something USB 3 or higher if you can, or at least a FireWire, maybe 800 or higher. You really want a higher transfer speed. Also, the speed of the drives. Most of the smaller drives are around 5,400 RPMs. You want something a little faster than that if you can find it. If you can work with the SSDs, the solid state drives, those are the fastest. And so those are even better for video editing purposes. Now, I couldn't bring it in here, but we also have a larger drive than even this one. And all of these are single drives. So it's one hard drive working. In larger configurations where you need even more room or even more speed, you can take a look into things like RAID arrays. And basically, it's a series of disks that are strung together. They behave as one unit, but it actually writes much faster, and you have some redundancy there. So if a file gets corrupted, or more importantly, if a drive gets corrupted, then you're not losing all of your data. Now, that's beyond the scope of this course here, but I did want to mention that you can use these external drives to work with, and I just wanted to show you what an external drive looks like. Now, what are some of the other options? So with these local drive editing, now this is where I'm either keeping the contents of my media either on my internal hard drive or on one of the external drives like I've shown you here. Basically, it's connected directly to my computer, okay? Obviously, I'm going to get faster access to that media because it's right here connected directly to my computer. So I'm going to get a little better performance out of these, but I can only have one editor at a time. So that drive is only shared with one computer, one user. Okay? It's not shared across a network. It's not shared with anyone else. And so in this kind of scenario, you're going to have a Premiere project folder. Within that folder, you're going to have your Premiere project file. And then Adobe is going to build a couple extra files or folders for you with some files in it called Premiere Autosave and Premiere Preview folders. So those are going to be built for you. Within the upper folder here, whatever your project folder name is, you're going to create a media folder. And this is where you're going to copy all of your data from your camera. And if you purchase video clips or imagery and you want to use that, that's all media. And you want to copy it into this folder. And I generally call mine like assets or media assets. Okay? So I have a little folder just for all of that external media, wherever it is that I store it. Okay? Now, that particular folder, it can be contained within my top-level Premiere project folder, as you can see here, or it can actually be outside of that folder. Now, why on earth would I ever want to do that? Well, this is where you may want to repurpose this media into other projects. So I'll leave the organizational part of it up to you. You decide what works best for you. For me, this is what I like to do. I generally have one media folder, but I may access that media folder in multiple projects. So I keep the media outside of the project folder. Now, the other scenario that we have here is what we call remote drive. In this scenario, your media and perhaps even your entire Premiere project folder is stored not on your local drive, not on an external drive that's connected to your computer, but on a network drive or perhaps a shared drive. Now, in this scenario, you can have multiple editors. Multiple people can access your media and your project files. So you want to be careful with that. There are some problems that can run into with that type of scenario. Basically, if you can just keep everybody on track with, hey, who is allowed to touch which file, everything's okay. It's when people start trying to access the same project file at the same time that we can run into some issues. So we want to avoid that when we can. So even though the media can be shared across multiple users, it can also be shared across multiple projects, but we do hit a slower performance. Now, I put that in there because out of the box, yes, it will be a much slower performance. However, there are equipment in place, networking equipment that would help speed up this process that are made specifically for this type of environment. Most people that I know don't have this type of environment. This is really for high-end production. Okay? All right. So based on that knowledge, we are going to create a local drive project here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here to Premiere. Now here in Premiere, I have an existing project open, and I'm going to close that. To do so, I'll just come up here to the File menu and choose Close Project. It asks me if I want to save any changes. I'm not going to save changes in this case, so I'll tell it no. It disappears, and my welcome screen comes back. And so now this is where I can choose to create a new project. Okay? So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a new project. I'll click on the project icon there. I'm presented with a new project dialog box. And the very first thing it wants to know is what's the name of this project and where do we want to put it? Okay? So I'm going to call this, well, let's just call it project _2. Okay. Next, the location. It's telling me right now where it's going to save this file. So I'm going to click over here to the far right. There's a browse button there. I'll click on that, and it'll allow me to select the location for my new project. Now, if you don't have a folder, a project folder already built for this, you can certainly create one at this time and then point to that folder. Now, I actually have a folder for you. So if you've downloaded the lessons files and you've extracted that, there is a lesson 2 folder. Okay? So if I open that folder, it's going to tell me that there are no items matching my search in here, and that's fine. It's just I'm pointing to the lesson 2 folder, and that's the important thing. I want to put everything inside this particular folder. This is my project folder. So I'm going to click Select Folder, and there we go. The rest of this information in here, you really could just leave alone. You really don't have to bother with it. Basically, right now, it's just telling me a little bit of information as to how it's going to display information to me. The defaults are perfect. I will not touch those at all. And then right here, the renderer. This is where if you have an acceptable video card, that will be selected for you automatically, and that's what I have here. If you don't have that card, it's going to use this other option here of Mercury Playback software only. So you really don't have to touch this at all. It's going to look at your computer setup, look at that card and see is this acceptable or not, and make the choice for you. You also have a little option up here called Scratch Disk. Now this is where it's going to save temporary files. Once again, I just leave this alone. What it's going to do is it's going to save all of this content into the same folder as my project. That's the default, and so that's what I'm going to stick with. Now, Where is this project folder? Well, it's on my local hard drive. It's on my internal hard drive on my computer. And the only reason that is because I don't actually have one of these external drives connected. But you could point this to, like I said, either your internal drive or one of these externals would be just fine. So I'm going to leave the defaults here other than the name and the location. I'm going to tell it OK. And that's it. That is creating a Premiere Pro project file. So this project file is just that. It is just one file, and we've put it inside of a folder. Now, as we do more with this project, it's going to grow a little bit, but this file is never going to get tremendously large. Our media files, on the other hand, well, they can be quite large. So this file is going to be nice and neat, and it's going to be kept in this one location. We can rename it if we want. We can edit it at any time, and anyone using the same level of Premiere can open this file and edit it at a later date. So there we have it, our Premiere project folder or file. Now, the next thing we want to do is talk about, well, where do we go from here? Where do we get our media from and things like that? So let's go back over to the computer screen here and take a look at our media options. So here in my project that I have open, once again, I have the same little workspace, this editing workspace. And one of the things that I have is in the lower left-hand corner, this panel called the Project Panel. And this is kind of like the Finder or the Windows Explorer panel for you, except it's located, or it's restricted to just this project. So only files that are associated with this project are going to be listed here. Now, the other thing here is just because I put a file inside of my project folder doesn't mean it's going to be listed here. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to minimize this screen for just a moment. Minimize some of this other stuff. So my project folder is here, this lesson 2 folder. And if I open this up, and I'm just using the Windows Explorer here, you can see that it has created my project 2 file here for me. Simple file, and take a look. Really, really small in file size, 26 kilobytes, tiny. Now, if I add media in here, okay? Let's say I just went out to one of these others. I'm just going to grab a file here just for giggles. I'm going to copy a file. Okay? I'm going to go back. And I'm back here in this lesson 2 folder. Now, if I paste this file in here, okay? I pasted a Photoshop document in there. And by the way, Premiere can use Photoshop documents. But just because this document is in my project folder, well, doesn't mean that it's going to be actually in my project. So let's take a look here. If I jump back over to Premiere for a moment, take a look here in my project panel. Do you still see anything there? It's still blank. That's right. So that's what we want to do next. We want to start importing our media. Now you can import media directly from your camera if you'd like. I don't recommend that. I recommend copying your media off of your camera, off of your devices, and put them on your hard drive. And I generally put them either in an assets folder or right inside the project folder. Okay? So that's generally my setup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually close this project, and let's talk about importing media for just a moment. So what kinds of media can we import? Now typically we're thinking of video files. That's what Premiere is all about, is editing video. But as I just mentioned, it can also import things like images and Photoshop files. So it has a variety of media types. Just about every camera manufacturer has their own media type that they create. A lot of them are pretty much the same, but with Premiere, you really don't have to worry about it. It will accept pretty much any type of media that can be created. When we import this media into a project, it creates a link between the media and the project. Okay? And remember, the project is just a list of instructions. So part of that list is, well, where's all the media located? So there's no embedding here. It is not permanently attaching the media to your project. It's just giving you an instruction as to where to go find it. So what does this mean for you? Well, one of the things that you get with a non-embedding workflow is also what we call non-destructive editing. The changes that I make to my media files within Premiere Pro are not permanent changes to the original media. You can always access that original media and pull it into another project and not have any of the effects, any of the edits applied to it. So it's non-destructive. This also means that you can update or replace your media very, very quickly because once again, it's just a link to that media. You're not actually physically removing the media and putting new media in. It's just a list of instructions telling you where to go find it. So it makes those updates and replacements very, very quick and easy. So what are we going to do here? Well, in lesson 3, we're going to show you how to import video and audio files, the two most common types. We're also going to show you how to import image files. And we're going to do all of this using the project panel. So I'm going to jump back over to Premiere for just a moment here. And we're going to open a new project here. Now, not a new project, it's new to us, but it's a project that I've set up for you. So once again, in each of these lessons, I've set up a starting document and a finish document for you so that if you're trying to follow along and things get a little too fast, you can always get caught up with where we are. All right, so here in the welcome screen, I'm going to open my next project. I'm going to navigate to my lessons folder, and we are in lesson 3. If I open that up, this is going to be the structure that you're going to see from here on out. There's going to be a start document, a final document, and perhaps some auto-save files here. So we're going to use the start document here. Once again, you may get this missing renderer thing. That's okay. Just bypass that. If you don't get it, well, that's okay too. And you can see that we have this same editing workspace. Everything looks pretty much the way it was before. We have this project, and now we want to start importing this media. Okay, so the project panel is going to be our friend in this case. Now there's different ways that you can import media. And right here in the project panel is telling you, you have to import media to start working with this panel. So how do we import the media? Well, one way is to go up to the File menu. From the File menu, there is an import command. And to the right, you will see the keyboard shortcut, Control-I. So if I click on that, then I get an import window here, this dialog box. And this is really just a file browser. So I locate my media. Now, where is my media? Well, I'm looking in my Lesson 3 folder, and well, I don't have a media folder in here. No. But I've already imported the media for you, and I'm sharing this media across multiple lessons. So if we go to the Lessons folder, these are the 10 lessons that we have, and at the very top is an Assets folder. Okay? So all of my media is stored here, and there's all different types of media in here. So we're going to open this Assets folder. Within it, there are some other folders, and there are some loose images here, there's some Photoshop files, there's a sound file, just all types of media. And this is all of the supported media. And that's what I have it filtered at over here in the lower right. So just above the Open button is a pop-up for the different media types. And look at that, man, it is amazing the different media types that Premiere can ingest. So if you're looking for something in particular, hey, I know that I am looking for a particular image type, like a JPEG. Well, there's a JPEG file. And it will filter it down and show me just the JPEGs in any folders. Okay? Generally what I do, though, is I leave this up here at the very top to all supported media. That way I can just kind of pick and choose the media that I want to work with. So let's say for this instance, I am going to select several of the images that we have here. There are lots and lots of images. Most of them are JPEGs. There's a couple of PNG files or PNG files here. I'm going to select these. So I'm going to just start selecting these images. Now you can select them one at a time, or you can select multiples. So I'm going to select multiples here by shift clicking. And if I scroll down, I have a couple more down here, but there's this AIF file, which is an audio file. I don't really want that just yet. I just want just these images over here. So to get the rest of them, I'm going to hold down the Control key. That'd be a Command key on a Mac. And then I can go ahead and select these other images. Now, I'm only going to select the JPEGs and the PNGs. Okay. And I'm going to choose Open. Once again, you can do these one at a time, or you can use multiples here. So if I go back over to my project panel, I'm going to mouse over it, and I'm going to hit that tilde key. And so now you can see that we have all of our imagery in here. Okay. Very, very cool. Now we're going to start importing movie files, audio files, various file types. And one thing that you might want to do is start looking at how to organize all of this media. And so for me, I like to use these, what they call bins. They're like little folders here. In the lower right-hand corner of my project panel, there's a few little icons down here. And there is a little folder icon. If you mouse over it, it will say New Bin. I'm going to click on that, and it inserts a new bin here. So I'm going to call this, well, what is it? These are all static or still images. They're not movies, so they're just static images. So I might just call this stills. I'll hit Enter to accept that. And then I want to move all of these assets into that bin. So once again, I can select multiple assets here using the Shift key, and then just drag them on top of the bin icon, that little folder icon there. You'll see how these have been stepped into the right a little bit. It lets me know they're inside this bin. I'll go ahead and grab the rest of these and drag them into the bin as well. To the left of my stills bin is a little arrow pointing down. This is a disclosure triangle, and if I click it, it hides those elements. It zips them up. Now, I'm going to hit the tilde key again. All right. So that's one way that we can import media, and that works with various media types. I just happen to choose still images. So how else can we import media into our project folder? Well, let's take a look at importing, let's say, the movie files and the audio file. So of course, we're working with Premiere Pro, and no Premiere project is complete without some video files. So let's import some video media. Now this time, instead of using the import command, I'm going to go about things a little bit differently here. I know that I have multiple movie clips. Okay? So I know that I perhaps should make a bin for them, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'll go to the bottom of my project panel. I'm going to click on the new bin icon. I'll name it, and this one I will call maybe raw video. This will be my untouched, unedited content. Once again, you can use any naming convention that you like, whatever works for you and your group. And then perhaps I will make another bin. Now, before I create the next bin, I want to be sure to click in this little area below my other bins. What that does is deselect any of these bins here. Because if I have one of these bins selected and I create a new one, it's quite possibly that it will put a bin inside of a bin, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but just not what I want here. So I'm going to click down here in this little area. None of my content is selected, and I create a new bin. This one's going to be, this is going to be the background music. So I'm going to just call this music. Okay. I want to show you one more thing about this project panel here. Actually, two more things. One is, if you double click on one of these bins, if I double click on the stills bin, look what happens. Depending on where I double click, I'm going to get different options. Now, I kind of clicked out to the right of that bin, so I got this dialog box. And if you look in the upper left-hand corner of that dialog box, I'm going to pull that to the center of the screen, it says import. So double clicking to the right of a bin here is going to initiate maybe an import command. Okay? I don't want that, so I'm going to close it. Now, if I double click on the name of that bin, well, I get something else. This is actually going to open the bin in a new window. See this? A new little floating window. Very, very cool. I'm going to close that. So when you're working with these bins and you want to say, let's see what's inside this particular bin, you can double click on the bin icon there or the name and pop it open in a separate window. Or sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes you, because it does kind of take over and cover up a lot of your workspace, sometimes you just want to open it up right here in the same location. You can just use the disclosure triangle. And now you can scroll down, you can see the contents of that particular bin. All right, so I want to import those video files. Well, I know from previous that if I double click, say here to the right of this raw video bin here, it's going to open up this import dialog. Okay. Inside the assets folder, there are some additional folders. Now, this just comes across because of the camera that we use to shoot this with. It creates these individual folders here. And if I open that up, there's going to be another folder inside of there. And then eventually, I'm going to get down to the actual video file. So I have to tunnel down a couple of folders deep. Your configuration will depend on the equipment that you're using, the equipment you're getting this media from. Okay? So in my case, it does build a couple of little folders there. I tunnel in, I select the particular clip that I want here, and I choose open. So it's importing that file. Now, it didn't necessarily put it inside the raw video bin. You see here, it's kind of put it up here at the top. So I want to drag that and drop it onto that raw video bin. Okay? All right. Now, I have others that I want to incorporate. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to click once on the raw video bin. That's targeting this bin. So when I import files now, I want them to go into this bin. Okay? I'll go up to the File menu, and I'll choose Import. I'm going to navigate back out to the Assets folder. Okay. Now, if I select the next video clip, and I select just the folder itself, this 00013.mtsbdmv. Wow, that's a lot. If I select just that folder, you can see here at the bottom, I do have an option to import the folder. I really wouldn't do that in this case because the folder itself is empty. It has another folder inside of it and then yet another file. So that can get a little kludgy there. It's not perhaps the way you want to work. But if you did have, say, a folder full of images or maybe a folder that has just video in it, you can import a folder directly and it will translate that into, you guessed it, a bin. So if you take the time maybe to organize your media when you copy it across, maybe put all your images in a folder, all your sound bites in a folder, and all your videos in another folder, you can import those folders directly and they are converted into bins for you. Very, very cool process. But for our purposes here, well, we don't have that. So we're just going to tunnel into this folder. There's a stream folder in there, so I'll tunnel into that. And then finally, here's my video file, and I'll choose Open. And so now it should put that right here inside the raw video. Okay. Now, you would continue on with this process, but I'm going to show you another way to perhaps do this. Okay. Just to the right of my project panel, in fact, grouped with my project panel, is this little panel called the Media Browser. Now, this is kind of like a replacement, or maybe a replacement is not the best word, but it works a lot like your file browser. So with this, I can say, well, I am working on the C drive, and I can twirl that open, and I can look for a particular user or a folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just tunnel down to where I saved my Premiere project. Okay? And if I tunnel down a little bit further, and let me go ahead and do this. Let me go ahead and hit the tilde key to make this panel a little larger. That will certainly make it easier for you to see. But you can see here, I'm just tunneling down into my folder structure here. I get to my lessons, and if I click on that, then I can see the assets folder. Okay? If I come out here to the right side of the media browser, there's my assets folder, and if I double click it, it'll show me the contents of that assets folder. It's pretty awesome. The one thing about the media panel here, that's the media browser panel, is really, really cool, and we can also do this in the project panel, is down here at the very bottom. There are some little icons, and I can enlarge my thumbnails, make them a little bit larger, easier to see. And then I also can switch this from a thumbnail view to a list view, if that makes more sense for you. Okay. Well, I like the thumbnail view, personally, and here's why. If I open up one of my video files, so I'm going to come up here, we've imported 13, the next one is 26. If I open that folder, there's another folder inside of it. I'll open that. And then here is my little video file. This is awesome. Check this out. If I just mouse, I'm not clicking and dragging, I'm just mousing over the video file, I can actually preview the video. So I can see, is that the video cut that I want? If it is, then yes, that's the one I want. Okay. So the media browser. Very, very cool little feature here. If I double click this, it's actually going to go ahead and open that up, and it's going to open it up in my source monitor. Now, if I come back over here and I look at my program panel, is it in my program panel? No, not necessarily. So, the media browser allows me to go through, search, I can preview the video. Is this what I'm after? If it is, then of course I can go ahead and import this video file. Okay. Well, just to save a little time here, I'm going to go ahead and start importing the rest of this media. In fact, I already have it set up for you. So let's just go ahead and jump ahead to see what the final would look like here. Let's go to the File menu, and let's open a project. We'll go to the Lesson 3 folder and the Lesson 3 final. Do I want to save the changes to the start document? But I'm not going to in this case, but you certainly could. I'll dismiss this other dialog. And so here you can see my folder structure in the project panel. I'm going to hit the tilde key. Here's all of my stills, all of my raw footage, and my music file. Now you can organize these as much as you see fit. I know some folks that will go into their footage, their raw footage, and then categorize these. Maybe for documentaries, you have different types of media. Maybe you have some what we call B-rolls, some secondary shots. And you know, you can organize that. So you can put a bin within a bin and do that sort of thing. All right, so importing media. The next step here, once we've created the project, we need to get all this media in here, and it can accept pretty much any media type. It's up to you as to how you organize that media. But I will suggest that you do create your bins and organize your media. Get that stuff sorted out. It's going to make life a lot easier when it comes time to start adding this media into your actual sequences. So be sure to organize that. You can also rename these files. So the file that's coming in, the media coming off of the camera especially, is going to have some sort of serial number and some sort of naming convention that the camera applies to it. And that might make very little sense to you. So it's okay if you would like to rename this media once you get it into your Premiere Pro project. Just like any other file, double-click the name. It will access the name so that you can change it. And you can change it to whatever it is you like, whatever makes sense to you. And so that's one of the features that we will cover in the next bit here. How do we rename these files? And then how do we review all of the files that we've imported? So reviewing our media. This is where we want to go through and basically preview all of our imagery and especially our audio and video clips. The more time you spend here, the less time you're going to spend in the actual editing process. You can foresee some of the little problem areas that you're going to run into, and you can pick and choose your media. So, saves time. It is a huge time saver. Yes, you are spending more time up front, but it's better spent here than in the actual editing process. You get a live preview in your source monitor. So this works with all media, including audio and still images. You actually get to see it and hear it before you actually add it to your sequence. You can mark unwanted content, which we will do. You can also add other markers. Maybe you have a point in the video that you think would be a good section for maybe a pop-up or some other type of event. You can certainly tag that particular timing inside of your clip. And when you add it to your sequence, the marker comes along. You can also create what we call subclips, and I sometimes refer to these as little snippets of the media. So let's say your media is 5 minutes long of some interview, but you want to take just a minute and a half in the beginning, and then maybe 30 seconds a little later on. These would be what we call subclips, and then we could reassemble our subclips and create a whole new interview, basically. All right, so what is it that we're going to do in this lesson? Well, we're going to take a look at how to preview the media in the source monitor. So this is where we're going to start with the first monitor and actually previewing our media, including sound. We're going to add some in and out markers to those media clips. And then we're going to move on to sequences. So let's have a look. Let's jump back over here. And let's go ahead and open our next lesson. Like I said, for each one of these, I've created a new lesson for you. That way we're all on the same page. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the tilde key to bring my little project panel back down into the lower left-hand corner. And I'm going to open my Lesson 4 Start project. It asks me if I want to save changes before closing. This is the Lesson 3. You can if you'd like. There's nothing wrong with that, but we don't have to. You'll get the warning about the playback engine. Once again, you can dismiss this. And so now we're basically reset. We have our 3 bins over here for our music, our footage, and our stills. Now the stills, we probably won't have to review those a whole lot, but let's go ahead and take a look. If I twirl the disclosure triangle to the left of the stills bin, okay, and I want to preview, let's say, this first image. Well, if I just double click on that first image, it's going to basically preview it in the upper left-hand corner. This is my source monitor. In fact, it says source right up here in the tab. And it's followed by whatever piece of media that you are previewing. In this case, it's 4A-FTS, blah, blah, blah. It's a JPEG. Now, this is a still image. So it really doesn't have any time associated with it. In my case, it has a default of, say, 5 seconds. So this piece of media will play, it will display for 5 seconds. And so you can change that, not a big deal. And you can look at all of the images here if you'd like, just double clicking on those. But once again, you really don't have to do anything with this. other than just to see, oh, is this the photograph that I want to include in my project? Okay, so I'm going to close that little bin there. The one we're really interested in is the raw footage. So I'm going to twirl open the raw footage, and I'm going to double click the very first media clip here. Double clicking it will open it up in the source monitor. Now this is Tom Perry here, and he is the president and founder of QMax Industries. They're friends of ours here in Charlotte, and we had our team go out and do a little bit of work for these guys, filming and doing some on-location shots here. So they're out in their factory, and Tom's going to talk to us a little bit about QMax here. And so you're going to get to see kind of a typical workflow here when you're getting raw media in. So I'm going to click on the play button here to start the playback.
This one I want you to have fun with.
All right.
Really want have fun.
So Tom's getting
All right,
ready
you
to
got it.
shoot.
All right.
Here's our slate.
Take 8, stand by, and action.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now? How much in lost downtime?
All right. So Tom goes through the process here. I'm not going to play the whole thing for you, but basically we can see that, well, there's a good bit of this here at the very beginning where Tom's kind of loosening up and our slate's coming in, and there's going to be a lot of that type of stuff where, you know, it's not as soon as the camera comes on, everything's perfect and we start rolling. Generally there's this few seconds, it could be more than that, where we have media that we really don't want. So this is the review process. We review what we want to keep and what we don't want to keep. And so I can drag the little playhead here, which is this little blue arrow here. I can just drag that left and right to preview. I can click the play button here. I also have a play in reverse and a play forward. But I also want to introduce you to some keyboard shortcuts. Now, I am a keyboard shortcut person. I love them. Premiere Pro has just literally hundreds of keyboard shortcuts. I think there is every key that's on your keyboard can be assigned and probably is assigned to something in Premiere. But 3 keys that I want you to get familiar with when it comes to previewing media, whether it's in the source monitor, the program monitor, or in your timeline. And that is J, K, and L. If I hit the L key, that is like a play button. If I hit the K, it will stop it. If I hit the J, it will play backward. Okay? Now, in addition to that, if I hit the L key to start playing forward, and then I hit the L key again, it plays twice speed. Hit it again, 3 times the speed. So you can really zoom through your content very quickly. So this is going to be really, really handy for you. J, K, and L. You're going to want to learn to use those keys when you're previewing your media. This will help you find what you want to keep so you can get rid of the rest. So I'm just going to go through here real quickly. I'm going to hit the J key, and I'm going to hit the J key again. I'm going to back it up. And now I'm going to hit the L key a couple times. So it's playing forward, normal speed. Tom's getting set. All right. So right here, just about where Tom is about to clap his hands here, is where I want to mark an endpoint. And so now I want to be able to move, say, 1 or 2 frames at a time. So here on the bottom of my source monitor, there's a play button in the center bottom. It says play or play stop toggle, basically. But then to the left of it, I can play backwards, so I can step backwards. And so I can click on this several times, and you can see it going backwards. So I want to get to a point where Tom is relatively still. I don't have to be exactly dead on with this, but this is where I want to pick up. Everything to the left of the playhead, anything that happened before this, I don't want. Now, I need to mark this as my endpoint. So right here along the bottom of the source monitor, there's these little brackets. And this first one is the mark in. It's denoted by the letter I. So if I just tap the letter I, it will mark an endpoint. So basically it says start here. Now you'll see just above the little playhead here, right here with the playhead, this area has become highlighted in gray. So this is marking an endpoint. And now I'm going to just fast forward here to the end. I'm going to drag my playhead out. Come out here towards the end. All right, so I know Tom's going to wrap up here pretty soon here. And I'll tap an O while my media is playing. And it will actually insert the out point. Okay? So that's your process. You mark the in and out of each of your media clips. Now, to move on to the next media clip, simply go down to the project panel, double-click the next media clip. It loads up, and I'll start the same process here. I'll hit the L key a couple of times to fast forward. And then I can back up with the J key. I'll hit the I, and notice that my playhead was still moving while I did that. It set the in point. So now I can fast forward. I can hit the L key several times. Now I'm going to start slowing things down, so I'm going to hit the J. And I'll hit the O for the out. And there we have it. So you would go through your media doing just this, adding in points, adding out points. Now what if you wanted to insert, let's say, a particular point in the video. Let's say that Tom says something here. Okay. So he's talking about a product called FTS, and let's say he talks about it right here. I want to insert a marker here. Okay? Not an in marker, not an out marker, just a standard marker, just denotes a point in time. So the very first button here on the source monitor, lower left-hand corner, marker. And you'll see it adds a little green tab right there. Beautiful. I can use this a little later on when I start to align graphics over this image. I know where in time to align that graphic, where that graphic should pop up. Okay. So that's essentially your process of reviewing your media. There's going to be a ton of this media that you may not need. As you saw here, we saw lots of points where Tom was getting ready, he's getting pumped up to do his interview here, and so we don't want to see that in the finished piece. So we can mark our in points and our out points. The more time you spend here, the cleaner the video will be when it comes to assembly. Now, do you have to get it dead on perfect? No, you can always edit this again later, and we'll see that a little later on in the course here. For now, we just want to mark all of their in and out points and get a rough idea of to where we want to start that piece of media and where we want to stop it. All right, well, we're coming up close to our break here, and so when we come back, we'll start assembling all of our media clips into a sequence. Welcome back, everyone. My name is William Everhart, and we are here in the middle of our Premiere Pro sprint. So up to this point, we have seen how to create a Premiere project, how to import media into that project. We saw how to organize that media, get it all into those little bins, and then we saw how to preview that media so we can start making little cuts, little edits inside of the media itself. Well, now it comes time to get down to actually assembling our media into one cohesive project. Let's make our movie now. And so for this, we're going to use a feature called a sequence. Now I mentioned here at the top of the programming that, well, with a sequence, that's where you string together multiple pieces of media. And I also mentioned that you could have multiple shows. Now those shows, well, that's your sequence. So in this case, the video that we're going to cut together is just one training video for this company called QMax. And this is more of a sales training tool. And like I said, this is just one component. And we're going to build this one component. And we could continue to add more components, adding more sequences, and putting them in this same project. So let's take a look at sequences. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, a sequence is just a combination of various media clips, and the result is one sequential video. Okay? You can add multiple audio and video tracks. So if you wanted to create things like picture-in-picture, or if you wanted to have a narrative track and a background audio track, like a music track, that's all possible, and you handle all of that within your sequence. And a sequence can represent an entire show or just parts. So you can also create just sequences for an introduction or a closing or some type of transition. This is where we get to combine these sequences or nest one of these smaller sequences, say an introduction or closing credit, into a larger sequence. It's called nesting. Finally, the sequences are what you're going to render or export to create your final video. This is the piece that you would share with whomever. Maybe you're going to put it into a PowerPoint presentation. Maybe you're going to put it into another e-learning tool like Storyline or Captivate. Who knows? Maybe you just want to share it online at your website. That's possible as well. So in this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to create a sequence, how to assemble that sequence, how to select the proper sequence settings, and this is really quite easy. In fact, it's so easy, it's going to go by so quick, you're not even going to realize that you did it. Okay? And we're going to show you various ways to add media into your sequence. All right. So let's jump back over to Premiere for here just a moment. Now, I still have my previous Lesson 4 project open. And we could continue on with this, but once again, I have created these so that we kind of jump ahead. Remember, this is a sprint course, so we want to jump ahead here a little bit. If I go to the File menu and I choose Open Project, now Premiere will only allow me to have one project open at a time. So when I choose this command of Open Project, well, it's going to look for the next project. All right, so we're going to go to Lesson 5, and in the Lesson 5 folder, there is a Start document. And I'm going to open that. Now, it's asking me, do I want to save my previous project? Because it's closing that Lesson 4. So in this case, sure, I'll save that. I'll dismiss any dialogues here. And now you may run into this, missing media for these clips. Now, this is very commonplace whenever you have a scenario where you move media. It does happen, folks. And so in this case, what we want to do is actually locate this media. Now, in this list, there's several media clips, and there's different types of media here. Anything with a check mark, well, Premiere has found that. But I have several images here and some other media clips here towards the bottom that, well, it just doesn't know where it is. Remember, this is a list of instructions of where to find the media. The media is not embedded. So we need to relink this media. Now, there's lots of options down here at the very bottom. There's tons of options down here, and you can play around with whatever you want in there. For our purposes, we're going to leave this at its default, okay? So what I want to do is it's selected the first file that it cannot find, and this is an image file. It's 4A-FTS. Okay, this is a JPEG file. Now, it's listing a file path. This is the directory. This is the set of instructions that says, hey, go to this drive, look in this folder, in here, and here. So that's where it was. Now, I obviously do not have access to this W drive. This W drive was my external drive. And if I had kept all this media on the external drive, then obviously it would find it. So things have changed. Let's update this. So this first file is selected. In the lower right-hand corner, I just click the Locate button. Okay. I get another dialog box here. It says, all right, well, in this case, it's the Media panel here, the Media Explorer. And so I just need to go and look for this. So in this case, I'm going to go into my Lessons folder. This is my Premiere Pro CC 2015 Sprint folder. And I look in my Lessons folder. And inside of there is my Assets folder. Now, at the very top of this screen, and I love this feature because it's like, well, what file was I looking for again? Well, Premiere is going to tell you. The last path was this drive, this folder, this folder, this folder. Well, if I work my way backwards, there's the file name. It was in the images folder, which was in the assets folder. Okay, well, I'm in the assets folder, so I just need to look for the images folder. I'll scroll down and I'll look for my images folder. Now, in this case, there isn't an images folder. The folder structure changed. So what does that mean to me here? Well, not a whole lot. Down here at the very bottom of my screen, there is an option that says display only exact name matches. And that is turned on for me here. This is great because honestly, if I turn this off, we're going to see all of the images that are in this folder because they're just kind of loose out here in the folder. Okay? See, all the images are there. By turning this on, well, it'll sort through no matter what folder I'm in and only display the image that has the exact same name. It will only display a file, whatever the file is, with the exact same name. Now, it will display folders because you can navigate into them. So all I have to do is select this image, that's the one, tell it OK, and now Premiere is going to go ahead and say, okay, well, that's where that image is, and based on that, it can go ahead and update all of the other images and all of the other missing assets. Once it finds its path, then it can reconstruct the rest of my document. So that's pretty awesome. All right, so with all of our clips in place now, Premiere knows where everything is. Let's take a look very quickly down here at the raw footage. Now I'm going to twirl this open, and because remember, if we double click it, we get a whole new panel, which, you know, that's okay too, but I really don't need that at this particular point. So I'm just going to twirl it open, and I'm going to double click on, let's say, one of the later videos here. I'm going to double click on the 0034. Now this video we didn't edit earlier, but I've done that for you. I've marked an in and an out point, and you can see this here in the source monitor. You can see there's this little blue bracket here on the left and one on the right, and this media in between represents the media that I want to have represented in my sequence. Okay, so all of that has been done for us. All of our media here, as far as this footage files, have been marked with both an in and out point, so we should not get any content that we don't want. All right? So that's one of the reasons why we do that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open up that first clip. It's 4 zeros and an 8. It's the very first clip here. Now, I mentioned earlier before the break that you can rename these clips. Okay? So if I just click once on the file name of any of my media clips, it should give me a dialog here where I can change the name. So I could call this, you know, clip A, intro, whatever works for you. And you can go through and name all of your clips if you so choose. Because remember, this name here that's assigned to it, well, that's coming from the camera itself. Okay. So I'm going to open up this very first clip here, and we can see that we have our little markers here, in and out. And what I want to do is I want to add this clip into my timeline. Now look here in the lower right-hand corner of my screen, this lower quadrant here. It says timeline. Now before it didn't say that, it had some other names on it. Okay? If you have no sequence open, and it tells you that right there, no sequences, it's going to display as timeline. Once we open a sequence or create a sequence, well, then things are going to change. Now, how do we create that sequence? All right. So I need a sequence so I can add this clip to it, right? Well, yeah, that's true. So if I go up to the very top of my screen, I have a sequence menu here. And I can click on that, and I can look up here and I can say, well, I don't see anything about making a sequence. Let's see, let's scroll all the way to the bottom. Is there a sequence in here? No, no. So you can't really create a new sequence from the sequence menu. To me, that's a little backwards, but there it is. So how do you create a sequence? All right, well, if you really are heart set on using a menu, if you come over here to the File menu, the very first command in the File menu is the New command. And if you mouse over that, you will see that you can create new projects, and hey, look at there, there's a new sequence. So if I click on this and I choose to create a new sequence, now I am presented with a lot of options, a lot of presets here. Now, which preset do I choose? Well, this is really up to you. This is going to be your output here, even though you can change this in the output process. But this is basically your editing preferences. What size, what resolution, if you will, what frames per second, all of those types of settings. What is it that I want to work with? Now, the general rule here is that you want to work with something that's as close as possible to the actual media that you're working with. Now, this can get a little tricky when you have multiple media sources. So if I have maybe a Canon video camera, but then I also shoot some video off of my Nikon DSLR, the settings might be a little different. So I've got two different types of settings here. Well, the nice thing about Premiere is that it can adapt whatever media you're bringing in to your sequence, or vice versa. So check this out. If I decide that I want something kind of universal, maybe I want to choose something like digital video here, NTSC. Maybe I'll do, I'm just going to choose maybe a standard here at 48K. Okay? I'm going to just select this. Over here to the right, it's going to tell me what I have, all the different settings for this, and I'll just tell this OK. All right? So it creates a sequence. All right? If I look over here in my timeline panel, that is now called Sequence 1. If I look over here in my project panel to the left of that, I have a new icon here called Sequence 1. And if I click on that, I can rename it. So this might be my QMax intro sequence. Okay? So I just rename it. Now, it's going to put this new item in whatever bin I was currently working in, which was my raw footage bin. That might not be the best place to put it. You know, we want to keep things organized here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create yet another bin. So I'm just going to create a new bin. Now it's going to insert this bin. Let's see, let me find it here. Well, let me try that again. New bin, there we go. There it is. So I'll just trash this one. Sometimes that happens. And I'll just rename this. So what am I going to call this bin? Well, I might call this one my sequences. This might be also, you know, episode 1 or something like that. Once again, the naming is up to you. What works best for you? So I'm going to call this sequences, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to maximize this panel. So once again, I'm going to hit the tilde key, or the tilde key. I always want to call it the tilde key. That just sounds better than the tilde. Anyway, I'm going to drag the sequences bin up and out. So I'm going to drag it out if I can and drop it. Sometimes it gets a little wonky there, and depending on where you drag and drop. And now I can open up my raw footage and I can grab my QMax intro. That's my sequence. Notice it has a slightly different icon there. And also to note that this little green square to the left, each of these media assets have different colored labels. And so a sequence uses by default green. All right, so I'm just going to drag this into the sequences. And once again, it's just about keeping things nice and neat and organized. And now I'll hit the tilde key, or the tilde key. Bring that back down. There we have it. All right, so there's my sequence, and the sequence is empty right now. So we want to add some media into that sequence. Well, I have the first piece of media loaded here in my source monitor. So the first way to insert media into a sequence is to drag and drop. Now I can do this from the source monitor, or I can do it directly from the project panel over here. So if you wanted to drag and drop from the project panel, you can certainly do that. Or, like I said, I can just come up here to the top into my source monitor. I'm going to just click and drag right over my video and just drop it. Now, I'm not going to drop it just yet because I want you to see what's happening here in the timeline panel. Depending on where I mouse, I'm going to drop this little piece of media. Left to right is the timing. You know, when does this occur? Up and down is the various tracks. So you do have multiple tracks. Okay? And this will also depend on your sequence setting. Some sequences have more tracks than others, but here's the cool thing about it is you can always add and delete tracks. Now I'm going to drop this and I'm going to put it right here at the very beginning of my timeline here. And so when I get to the very beginning, I'm going to see it actually does this little what we call snapping. It's actually like a little magnet here, and it snaps to the left-hand side. I get these little white arrows, and I'm going to release it. And then I'm going to get a dialog box. Okay? Your clip does not match the sequence settings. So remember, when I told you you were selecting a sequence, you want to match it to your media type as best you can. Now, this is going to help in the rendering process, it's going to help you with the editing process. It takes less processing power if it doesn't have to change it. Occasionally, you do have to change it, but for our purposes, we don't. So what this is telling me is that I have a clip mismatch. What I want to do is I want to change my sequence settings, that DV, HD Pro, those settings that I chose early on. I want to change those to match this piece of media that's coming in because I've shot all of this media on the same camera. So I'm going to click the Change Sequence Settings. So what it's going to do is it's going to match my sequence to my media. And that's primarily the way I like to work. Now, any other media I drag in here, if it's out of sequence, I'll tell it do not change, and I'll actually change the piece of media to fit these sequence settings. Okay, so that's what I mean by creating a new sequence and selecting the settings themselves. Now, let me show you another way to create a new sequence here. If I close this sequence, it's here in this panel, and if I click this little X, it's going to close that sequence. I have just a blank timeline. Okay? I'm going to do that same operation here. I'm going to come up to the left. I'm going to grab my source monitor. I'm going to click and drag and drop this right into the middle of the timeline. Bang. It just created a new sequence for me. I didn't have to go through the dialog box of finding out what are my camera settings. I didn't have to worry about mismatch. It just created it. It's just so simple. So for me, that's generally how I create my sequences. I drag my first piece of media in there and let Premiere Pro figure it out for me. Now, I'd also put this media at the very beginning, which is right now for where I want it. All right, so we've got our first piece of media in there. How do we add additional pieces of media? Well, we can continue this drag and drop process. Now, most all of this media in here, in fact, all of this video clips in here has the start and, or in and out, basically the start and stop points within the media. We've marked those areas that we want to keep. So it will only bring across those components or those parts of the video. So if I preview over here on the right-hand side of my screen, my program monitor, this is a preview of what's actually in my sequence. So we can see here, if I play this.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
You see, we don't get all of the joshing around and stuff that he was doing in order to prep. We're not seeing all of this media here in the source where he's kind of jumping around and we're getting our slate. All of that has been removed for us, okay? That's because we set those in and out markers. Okay, so for the rest of my media here, those in and out markers have been set. I'm going to drag the next media, the next video clip here. And this is 00013. And I'm going to drag it, instead of opening it in my source monitor, I'm going to drag it directly from the project panel and drop it here in my timeline. Okay? So just like that, I have added to my sequence. Okay? And if I want to preview this, I'm just going to move the playhead forward here a little bit, and I'll hit the play button here in my program monitor. Remember, the program monitor is the preview of your actual sequence. This is what goes out to the masses.
Let me show you how QMax products can quantifiably reduce your costs while making your operations significantly more reliable and energy efficient.
Now, what happens in the big gap? Well, you see we get dead air here. When the playhead hits the next clip,
delivers the best
it just comes right up and starts playing
to
again.
Piping systems, tanks and vessels, and process equipment.
Okay. So obviously we don't want this gap here, and that gets back to the editing. We're going to do some editing a little later on. Now normally the way I like to do this is to just drag these around. Just drag these little clips around. And if I drag it back to the left, something's going to occur here. When it gets close to that first clip, when the start of this clip that I'm dragging gets close to the end of the previous clip, it's going to snap to it. It'll actually jump or snap. And they act like little magnets. They just kind of click together. Okay? So now I have something that's a little more cohesive here. I'm going to jump back here to the beginning just a little bit, and let's play through this little edit point here.
Reliably reduce your costs while making your operations significantly more reliable and energy efficient. QMAX delivers.
Okay, so now we had a little cut scene there. It's not perfect, but that's okay for right now. We'll go in, we're going to sweeten this up with some transitions a little later on. But that is the process. You're just adding these clips one after the other. So let's go ahead and add a few more clips. Now, I'm starting to fill up my sequence here. I can't see too much further here to the right. So below your sequence panel, below your timeline panel, there is a little scroll bar down here. And if I drag the little shuttle there, you can see I'm scrolling my time. Okay? You can also zoom in and zoom out on your timeline so that you can see more time in this window or less time. So what I'm going to do is I want to see more time. I actually want to reduce this down. I want to make these clips basically look smaller so I have more room to start dragging and dropping. So I'm going to grab the right edge of the shuttle, the little scrolling shuttle here at the bottom. I'm going to grab the right edge of it and drag it to the right. And you'll see my media clips are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now I'm not cutting those clips, I'm not reducing their time, I'm just showing more time in this panel. Okay? All right, now, navigation. Let's talk a little bit about navigation of this timeline now, this sequence here. This can get a little tricky. Moving the playhead back and forth, you can scrub that as much as you'd like, and wherever that playhead lands, you're going to see in your program monitor. So your program monitor is going to be your best friend when it starts coming to editing here in your timeline. But dragging that playhead is going to get really old really fast, and it's going to slow down things. There's a time for it when it works great, but most of the time you want to use, say, a keyboard shortcut. And as I mentioned earlier, just about every key on your keyboard has been mapped to some function inside of Premiere Pro. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to take a look at some of these keyboard shortcuts and navigate this sequence and go ahead and finish building this out. All right, let's go back to it. So I can start moving my playhead. Now, if I drag the playhead out, okay, yeah, I am going to hear sound here in the background while I drag. So I'm scrubbing the playhead and I'm going to hear that sound. Well, I want it, say, somewhere about here towards the end, but I'm not sure, is that actually the very end? It is possible to come out here and grab just a little sliver of dead air. Now, if I drag another piece of media in here, all right, so the next piece is 00026. If I drag this out here and I snap it, well, it looks like I've put it right after the first clip or the second clip here. So let's see what happens. I'm going to come back just a little bit and I'm going to play it.
Comparably, QMAX ETS is a breakthrough system for all forms of electric tracing.
Oh, you see we had a little blank spot there. Now, one of the things I can do, on my keyboard I have the directional arrow keys. I'm going to tap the left arrow key, and that's going to move my playhead back one frame at a time. So I'm just tapping it several times here to go backward, and we can see, oh, okay, there's a couple of frames here that are blank. Ooh, that's an issue. So dragging and dropping and then dragging this playhead, as I said, can be a real nightmare. All right. Well, I'm going to just move my playhead out of the way. And then I'm going to grab this last clip again. I'm going to drag it down here towards the end, drop it. So when you're dragging and dropping, these things will snap to either other media elements or that playhead. So be extremely careful. Well, now that the playhead's out of the way, if I drag this media back, it should snap to that playhead. Now, one other thing that is quite possible is that I can go beyond that and actually overlap this video. So I'm overlapping my previous piece of media. This can be very dangerous. What is it going to do? Well, it's going to overwrite that piece of media. Let me show you. So here's the second media clip here.
Yes, our patented fluid tracing system delivers the performance comparable to jacketed pipe with the flexibility and low cost of a tube tracing system. Using our tank heating
And you see
solutions,
here we just cut immediately to the next scene. So that's obviously not what I want to do. So mistakes happen, and just like any good application, Premiere Pro has an undo feature. Now you can access this from the edit menu if you'd like, but there is the shortcut, and it's pretty universal. Control-Z, Command-Z on a Mac, and that will undo the last step. And you can undo several times, so you can keep going backwards in time and undo multiple mistakes. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to drag this out here to the end and snap it to the end, just like so. All right, what about the other pieces of media? Let's see other ways that we can, one, navigate the timeline, and then two, insert media into that timeline. So the next piece of media here is going to be 00034. Okay? I'm going to double click on that here in my project panel so I can preview it here in my source monitor. I have my in and out markers set, and here in the lower right hand corner of the source monitor there's a few more icons here. There is a little icon here, it's a series of little boxes here, and this first one we have is what we call an insert edit. Okay? And it's denoted by the comma is its shortcut. And then you have this other one called an overwrite edit. These two edits will basically insert or overwrite the media wherever your playhead is in your sequence. So my playhead is still here at the center mark maybe of the second video clip that I've inserted. So if I use the insert command, watch what happens here. It actually split that piece of media and inserted this new piece of media from my source monitor directly into that track, right in between it. So I've cut the clip, spread it apart, put this new piece of media right in the center. That's an insert edit. Now that's obviously not what I wanted to do, so I'm going to undo that. Control-Z, Command-Z on a Mac. What about an overwrite edit? Well, that's the other option that I have here. So overwrite is the period. If I tap a period, notice that it didn't split the clip, it actually replaced part of the clip where my playhead was and part of the next clip, because this piece of media kind of spanned that duration. It spanned a little bit of both of those. Once again, it is inserting this or overwriting this based on the position of my playhead. So once again, the result here is not what I'm after. I'm going to undo that. So if you want to get to using these insert and overwrite commands, using these keyboard shortcuts, another keyboard shortcut that you want to know is how to navigate that playhead. How do I move that playhead without actually using the mouse? Well, if you use the up arrow key and you are targeted on the sequence itself, the up arrow key will navigate the playhead to the previous edit. So you see it jumped right here between the first clip and the second clip. That's a cut point. If I press the down, it goes to the next. If I press down again, it goes to the end. So now I know my playhead is positioned exactly where I want it to be. Over here in my source monitor, I have the clip loaded up that I want to use next, so I can use an insert edit, and it puts it right in there. And when it inserts it, look at what's happened to my playhead. It went ahead and moved it to the end of that piece of media. So I come down here and I select the next media clip, which is 00048. I don't even have to open it up in my source panel. If I just target it once, just click it once here inside the project panel, and if I use that comma command, just a comma, it will insert it in my timeline right there where the playhead is, which was right where I wanted it to be. So using keyboard shortcuts to navigate the timeline here. Once again, the timeline has to be active, but just click in the timeline there, and then you can use the up and down to move the playhead to your edit points. If you use the left and right arrows, it's going to move 1 frame at a time. If you hold the shift key while you use the left arrow, it's going to move 5 frames at a time, I believe it is. So it goes a little faster. And then, of course, you can always use your J, K, and L. L will play, K will stop, and J will play backwards. All right. So now this gets us into the next point of media that we want to insert. Now we've inserted all of this media, and this is our main piece of media, if you will. This is all of the audio, all of the video. This is the main portion of our video here. And in this case, we're not going to cut too many other videos. We don't have any B-roll in this particular case, but we do have some other imagery that we want to add, and we also have a music track that we want to add. So let's take a look at adding imagery and a music track to our sequence here. All right. So back over here in my project panel, I'm going to twirl up the raw footage folder here. And very quickly, I'm going to open up the music track here, or music folder here. I have a single music file in here. Now, if I double click it, well, then it opens it up here in my source monitor, and I can preview it here. Now, what I'm seeing is actually the waveform. So these little spikes actually represent the actual notes that are being played in this music. So let's just give a quick listen here. Okay. So we got a little music track now. As it goes a little further along, okay, it changes. If I look in the lower left-hand corner of the source monitor, I have a little clock over here. Now this is telling me my current playhead position. If I look over here to the right, there's another little clock, and this is telling me my in and out duration. Now I don't have an in or an out point marked in this piece of media. So in this case, that's the entire music track. This song lasts for 3 minutes, 11 seconds, and 24 frames. Okay? That's how this little clock is read. There is 4 digits there. Reading from the right, these are the frames. This is the number of frames. The next number is your seconds, then minutes, then hours. Okay? Now you'll see these clocks also here in the timeline. You have a little clock here on the left. That's your current playhead position. In your program monitor, there's one on the left. That's your current playhead position. And then this last one out here is, once again, your duration. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to drag this piece of media into my sequence. The drag and drop is usually the more friendly type of adding media method. So I just load it up here, I click, hold, and drag. Now, when I go to drag this in, notice that I'm trying to drag the actual waveform. And it's not working for me. Now that worked fine on video, but we're not working with video. We're working with audio. So Premiere makes a distinction here. Instead of being able to drag and drop by grabbing the actual visual component here, because the audio doesn't have a visual component, there's a tiny little icon here that represents a waveform here at the bottom. Just below your waveforms, there's a little tiny icon right in the center of the source panel. If I take that and I drag that, well, then things start to appear here in my sequence. Now, once again, if I drop this on one of my other audio tracks, well, it's going to replace, Tom's voice here. I don't want to do that. So just below, there is a A2 track. So we can see this here. We have a A1, 2, and 3. These are different audio tracks. And so I want to place this on my audio 2 track. Okay. Now, my audio here appears to be a little bit longer than my video, but that's okay because I can always trim this, and I can also maybe add a little more video. Who knows what we're going to do to it. So for now, I'm just going to place it in here. Let's take a look at what happens when we preview our clip now. So let's go to the program monitor. In the program monitor, let's hit play.
QMax delivers the best overall solutions to piping systems.
Okay, I think you see what's happening here. My audio track is overriding. My music is much louder than my actor here. So what I need to do is deal with that. And we're going to deal with that in an upcoming chapter. But for now, for me to make my edits, I want to basically mute the music track. It's here, it's there, in position. All I want to do is just turn the sound off for now. We'll deal with it later. So here in my little sequence panel here, my timeline panel, I'll find that A2 track. And then to the right of it, there's several little symbols. There's an M symbol. It says mute track. And if I click on that, it lights up green. And now when I preview,
tanks and vessels, and process equipment.
I only hear Tom.
QMax pipe heating systems are...
All right. Now, before it's all over with, I'll unmute that track, and then I'll be able to edit that audio track and lower the sound. But for now, like I said, all we need to do is just get it in position. And we're going to use this kind of as our timing, because we do have this piece of music here, and it's set at 3 minutes and 11 seconds. So I want to try to maybe match my video as close as I can to that amount of time. All right. So we've got music in here. What about imagery? My imagery is going to come in various forms. Now, I can bring over Photoshop files, I can bring over still images such as JPEGs or PNGs. The Photoshop files can be layered Photoshop files, which is a whole other area just outside of the realm of this particular course. But we will show you how to import those. We'll show you how to apply some various formats, like a PNG format or a JPEG format image to your sequence. Now, we'll use these kind of like little pop-up graphics in this case. So Mr. Perry is going to be talking about a particular product, and so I might want to have an image of that product or maybe the logo of that product pop up so that we have a visual reference as to what Tom is talking about. So let's see how this works. It's almost like a picture-in-picture, if you will, except the second picture is just going to remain still. So let's have a look. So getting back to our sequence here, I want to go ahead and save this project. Now, Premiere does a pretty good job of every so often making a save for me. It's kind of a temporary file, but one of my mottos is save and save often, especially when it comes to a product like Premiere. So I'm just going to Control S, that'd be Command S on a Mac, to save my project. And so now I know that if it crashes, I'm okay. Everything that I've done so far has been saved. All right, now let's go back over here to the project panel and let's take a look at our stills bin. Now this time I'm actually going to double click on the bin icon here so it'll pop open the bin of the stills in a separate window. Now this still works. I mean, it's not a dialog box, it's just a floating window. You could put this on a separate monitor if you wanted to, that would be totally okay. But then what I want to do is I want to change the display. This is imagery, and while I may have taken the time to go ahead and rename my imagery, it's more of a visual thing. What if I could just switch this up? If I go to the lower left-hand corner of this panel, there is a little icon here. It says List View, and there's another one called Icon View. I'm going to put it in Icon View because this is much more visual. Yeah. Now I can see exactly what it is I'm looking for. So I know that based on a script that I have, that Tom was using, all of this content here was scripted. So we kind of know what elements we want to use and when. You just follow your script. In this case, I know that one of the first elements is going to be this steam leak here. It's some pipes or rusty pipes and steam kind of spurting out of them. So I know that's going to be one of the first images that I use. So I'm going to just move this panel out of the way just a little bit, give myself a little more room here. And what I can do is I can just drag this image and then drop it. Now, where do I drop it? Now, once again, if I drop it on existing clips, it will actually replace that media. So that's not what I want. I want to put this on a secondary track. So there's a V2 track, and that's where I might put it. Okay. All right. So let's move our playhead back here for just a moment. And let's see what happens here. So now, when my playhead enters that particular area where I dropped that piece of media, we now see over in the program monitor both Tom in the background and our image. Very, very cool. Okay? But, well, that image is dead center there, and it's covering up Tom. Now, we certainly don't want that. So let's take a look at how we can modify this. I'm going to close this little bin here for a moment. Okay? And I am going to click once in the program monitor. I'm going to hit my tilde key to expand that. And then I'm going to mouse over this image. Okay? Now, if I just click it, nothing happens. But if I double click that image, it should allow me to edit it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Really kind of depends. Depends on what I have selected. So let me escape out of this for a moment. Let me hit the tilde key. And I should have this piece of media selected. Okay? Now when I go back over here, it understands, yep, you did have that little piece of media, that little image selected, and now I get these little boxes around it. So when I double click on it now, it's targeting it, it's selecting it. And what I'll do is I'll just click on this and drag it now. So I'm just repositioning this. I'll just drag it over here out of the way. Okay? So this video was shot with this in mind. Mr. Perry is off center here, and we've left room over here so that we can put these types of pop-up imagery. Okay? All right, great. So that's my process here. Now, the other thing that I have to contend with is how long is this image on screen? Well, that we'll get into with the editing part of it, but essentially we can extend the default amount of time. Now let's go ahead and add a couple more pieces of media, and in the next chapter we'll start dealing with those edits. So, I'm just going to come back over here to my stills, and I'm going to open that bin, and then I know that, okay, the next piece of media here is going to be this frozen pipe here. So I'm just going to drag and drop that. Once again, I'm going to put it here on the V2 track, and I'm going to put it right after that first piece of media. Okay. Well, that's great. I'm going to close this bin. But now, where are these pieces of media showing up? Well, that's what we need to determine here. So I'm going to zoom in now on my timeline. Now we're going to get the timing of when these images occur on screen. So I'm going to grab this little shuttle here, the right edge of that shuttle. I'm going to pull it to the left, and that's going to zoom in on my timeline. Okay, makes them a little bit easier to see. I'm going to move the playhead back, and I'm going to listen to the dialogue here. So I'm going to start here at the very beginning.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
Okay, so right there he started talking about steam traps, and that's what this image was. So this image should really occur very early on. I'm just going to drag it to the left, and once again it's going to snap to either the edge or the edge of a piece of media, or in this case maybe even my playhead. So I can use that to my advantage. If I zoom in a little closer, I can scrub the playhead back. All right, so right about here. This is about a little more than a second in, almost 2 seconds into this clip. He's talking about steam traps. So that's when I want this to occur. Now, how long do I want it to play? What's the duration of this? Now, the default here is 5 seconds. But if you want this video or this media to play a little longer, you can mouse over the right edge of the little image, right here in the timeline. When I mouse over that right edge, even though I'm using a regular selection tool, Premiere is smart enough to know that, well, I'm at the end of the duration of that particular image. If I click and hold and drag it to the right, you see I'm adding time to it. Okay. So there's a little clock down there below where I'm dragging. It's telling me what the actual duration is. The number to the left has got a plus sign. It says how much time I'm adding to it. So if I were to add 3 seconds, then it should come out to be a duration of about 8 seconds because it started out as 5 seconds. So there we have it. Just extending the amount of time the image is going to show up.
They're not functioning right now. How much in lost downtime would it save you if we could reduce that number, say, by half? When was the last time your line shut down because of a frozen pipe?
Okay, So here along about the 13-second mark, Mr. Perry starts talking about the next item, the next issue, and that brings up the frozen pipe. So once again, I just grab my piece of media and I drag it to my playhead. Beautiful. Now, in that second instance, I probably don't want to make this particular image show up any longer because he immediately goes into his introduction. In fact, I might want to move this element a frame or two to the left. So with this, if I use the left arrow key, I'm moving the playhead. Okay? If I hold down, in my case, the Alt key, I believe it is, on a PC, and it's the Option key on a Mac, the piece of media that I have selected here is that image. And watch what happens. If I start tapping this left arrow key while I'm holding down the Alt key, it's actually moving that piece of media one frame at a time. If I add the Shift key to that, so Shift Alt and then the left arrow key, it's moving 5 frames at a time. So in this way, I can kind of fine tune where this little piece of media starts and then stops. Okay, now, to see the piece of media actually in the program monitor so I can edit it, well, I need to select that piece of media and I need to have my playhead over that piece of media. So what I'll do is I'll make sure the media is right here, my playhead is right here with it, and then I want to double click on that image there inside of the program monitor. The little handles pop up, and these little handles allow me to change the position, and they also allow me to scale it. So if I grab the lower left-hand corner of this image, and just to make this a little easier for you to see, I'm going to expand. I'm going to hit the tilde key here while I'm over the program monitor. And so what I want to do is I'm going to grab the lower left-hand corner here of my image and just drag it in. Now it's going to scale to the center. It's also going to maintain the aspect ratio. So I don't have to worry about that sort of thing. I don't have to worry about distorted images. And now I'll just kind of slide this into position. There we go. I'll hit the tilde key again to escape back. So that is your process. You're going to just continue to drag media into the position that you want. Now we're using that V2 track to create that second layer of imagery. That's a visual track. It's a video track. But visual, that's kind of how I match that V1, V2. Anything that's in a V track, I can see. Anything that's in an A track, I'm going to hear. Now, the way those tracks work is whichever one is on top, that will be in front of the other elements. Notice that all of our imagery was on top. It's on the V2 track, so it's on top of our video track, and therefore it's in front of our videos. Okay. So that's the process of adding media. I've given you several other files that you can add to your track here, just dragging and dropping. You can also use the insert media command or the overwrite media command, but for those, you want to play around with the tracks here for just a moment. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to show you how to do that real quick, and then we're going to jump into the next section of actually editing these clips. So let's say I want to insert the next piece of media. I'm just going to move the playhead down here a little ways, and I want to add another still. So I'm going to come over here to the stills, and let's say I want to, I don't know what the next one here is going to be. I'm going to say it's going to be this one right here, this FTS. If I double click on this item, okay, what does that do? Well, it opens it here in the background in my source monitor. So I'm going to dismiss this window. Okay. So I'm viewing it here in the source monitor, and now let's say I want to add that to my timeline. Okay. Well, I can use my insert, right? If I use the insert command here, it's going to insert it right at this point, right? Sure it is, but look what happened. Whoops. It actually inserted it in the V1 track. So what did that do? That split my video and inserted the still image right in the middle of it. And that's not really what I want to have happen here. So let's undo that. So how can I get it so that when I insert a command or overwrite a command, it'll actually map it to the second track? I actually wanted to put it on the V2 track. Well, that's what these little markers here. So over here in my timeline, on the left-hand side, we've got all these different tracks, V1, V2, and there's 2 columns. So this first one just says, hey, this is linking to the source. So I'm going to set this here. I'm just going to click in this little area. It's going to move V1 up. Now, I want to click on the right-hand side. I want to toggle this track for targeting. So I'm going to click on the V2 here. It's going to light up, but look what else is happening. V1 is still highlighted. So just to make sure nothing bad goes on, I'm going to click the V1 track to turn it off. And I'm also going to do this for the audio 1, audio 2, and audio 3. Basically, I'm telling it that if I use one of these insert or overwrite commands, put it on this V2 track, map to the V2 track. Okay? By turning off these other ones, I will hopefully avoid any mistakes, any overwrites that were not warranted here. So once again, I have my image, I have my tracks mapped properly. So if I use this insert command again, once again, that's the comma key. Oops, what happened now? Well, it did insert it on the V2 track, but, well, it still performed an insert. It mapped across both of the media tracks here and into the audio tracks. So I'm going to undo that. So in this case, what I want to do is instead of an insert, I want to use an overwrite. Now, it puts that media in place, but it didn't change anything on my other media tracks. The insert command is just that. It will insert or shoehorn your piece of media in between the pieces of media where your playhead is. And that's exactly what we were seeing happening there. So the insert command, very, very powerful when you want to insert a piece of media between 2 other pieces. If you don't want that, the overwrite is what we want to do. And so that's what we did here. So hopefully that gives you a little understanding of how to add media into your sequences, how to create those sequences, how to add the media to them, and how to string those things together. Now in the next exercise, we're going to pick up from this point where we've added all of this media and we're going to start making some of these edits. We want to maybe manipulate some of those in and out points that we created earlier. So let's take a look back over here. So what we want to do is learn how to select clips in our sequence, how to perform the various trim and ripple edits, how to rearrange our clips, how to split a media clip, and how to remove clips from a sequence. So some very basic editing. These are all little edits that you will make on a regular basis when we're working in Premiere. All right, so I'm going to jump back over to Premiere. And instead of using this project, once again, we're going to step up to the next project. So I'm going to go to the File menu. I'm going to open my next project. So we're going to jump over to Lesson 6, open that up, and open up the Start document here. I'll save changes to my previous document, dismiss the dialog, and I'll go ahead and find this or locate this piece of media. Once again, it should be here in the Assets folder. There it is. It'll update the rest, and here we have it. So now, what we'll see here in our timeline, is that we have our video 1 track with all our video. We have a V2 track that has all of our imagery, and then there's actually an additional piece of track here, this V3 track. Now this just has other bits of media in it. So in this case, it's the various product logos. So if I come over here, I'm going to expand this for you. So the V2 track in this case is holding the large image in the background. The V3 track is holding this logo here. So this is a separate component. As you can see, I can pick it up and move it around. Okay, so that's what we have. Multiple tracks. You can always add more tracks. In fact, that's probably one of the things that we'll do here in an upcoming video. All right, so what are some of these basic edits that we can create? We want to take a look at a trim edit, maybe a ripple edit, and a few other types of edits. Now we saw this a little bit earlier with the image file. If I mouse over an image, and here in my timeline, I'm just going to expand this, and I'm going to zoom in on this track a little bit. Okay. If I select an image, that's a piece of media. and it's represented here in the V2 track. And if I mouse over the right edge of it, my cursor changes to a little red bracket, and that is a standard, just a trim edit. It just means I'm going to cut the tail end or the head end of that piece of media off. Now, what happens when we do this to actual video? We saw what happens when we do it to an image. The image doesn't show any longer. What about video? If I mouse over, I'm going to select this first video here, and if I mouse over the right edge of it, okay, once again, I'm going to get that little red bracket here. If I click and hold and start dragging to the left, okay, and then release, well, I get this gap in here. Now, what else happens here? Well, basically, I have trimmed off the last part of what Tom is saying here. Let's see if we can open this up here a little bit.
Process heating systems have...
And so we just cut him off, all right? So I'm going to undo that. So if you do have a piece of media where it's gone a little too long, maybe you just want to trim it off. Maybe the in and out point are not exactly where you want them to be. You can use a standard trim for that. Now what if, let's say we trim a good portion of this off, but we don't want to leave this gap here, okay? For that, we want to create what we call a ripple edit. So I'm going to undo this. So what I want to do is I want to trim this video, but I don't want to leave the rest of these videos just kind of hanging out here to the right. I want them to move to the left as well. So with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch tools. Just to the left of my timeline here, left of my sequence, I have all of my different little tools here. There is a tool called the Ripple Edit tool. I'm going to click on this to select it, and now if I mouse over the right edge of that same clip, instead of a red bracket, I get a yellow bracket. And if I click and drag, okay, and drop, look what happens. All of that other media after this one moved to the left. So there's no gap in between. Now, you may not always want to do that, but that is one way to basically make sure you have no gaps in your video. Now I'm going to undo that. Okay? So a regular trim edit and then a ripple edit. The difference between the two is simply the fact that what happens to the media after your edit. Does it leave a gap or does it come along for the ride? You can edit in either direction. It doesn't matter. You can edit from the front of a clip like so. And once again, it will close that gap. I'll undo that. Now you also have some other tools in here. Some of these other ones are a little more specific, a little more than what we want to get into in this particular course. But you also have a rolling edit and then a rate stretch tool. These will also make timing edits for you, but they just go about it a little bit differently. Finally, you have two more down here called a slip tool and a slide tool. Once again, a little more than what we want to get into in this particular course, but we will have additional courses that will go into the more advanced editing features. So, just a basic trimming and ripple editing. Once again, the major difference between these two is what happens to the media after the edit. Does it come along for the ride, or are we left with a gap in between? And it's up to you to decide, you know, design-wise, what works best. How does this work best for me? Do I need a gap there? Do I need a pause in my video? And if you do have a gap there, you're probably going to have a secondary track, like another video track or maybe a couple of images over the top of it. It could be another video on top of that, just something from a B-roll, just some other action that maybe goes along with a narrative in the main video. There's a multitude of things that you can do, so much so that we really just can't get into it here. So basic editing, you're going to string your media together, and then you can start using these edit tools to trim those start and stop points. Okay? Now, let's take a look at what happens at those transition points. How do we transition maybe from one video to another video? So transitions. The one thing that I can tell you about transitions is that they're not a necessity, okay? And that's actually the last point here. Transitions are great when they are used properly. You can see this in even PowerPoint presentations. We have transitions in those. We don't want to jump around all over the place and disorient our users. Video is no different. Transitions need to be subtle, and they need, it's okay for sometimes for them to kind of reorient the user, but for the most part, they just should be a byproduct. We really shouldn't notice them at all. Now you can use these transitions to create a bridge between your media clips. Now maybe you have a clip here that maybe starts a little abruptly or ends a little abruptly, just where the two pieces of media come together, not so smooth. We can use a transition to help smooth it out. Okay? They can be used to reorient learners. So maybe in an e-learning scenario, we want to maybe dive into a part of a video that shows a very in-depth process, and then we want to use a transition to reorient the user that, okay, we're leaving that process and maybe we're coming back to the classroom here so we can go on to the next topic. So that's where transitions really work well. So in this lesson, we're going to show you how to apply the default transition, how to apply other transitions, and then how to customize and remove or replace transitions. Once again, I'm going to go to the File menu here, and I'm going to open my next project here, which is going to be the Lesson 7 project. Once again, if we're getting these missing, we just locate that missing piece of media. It will find the rest. And in this case, we have multiple edits that have been applied here. One of those edits included leaving a gap between the media. Now, I had just talked about this, so let's take a look. If I move my playhead out here towards the end of this particular piece of media here, I'm going to zoom in on that. We can see that on the V1 track and the A1 track, we've got Tom talking here in the background. And then we go to a graphic here of a particular product. Well, in the video, Tom goes on to talk about this, and he moves on into another subject. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bridge that gap there for just a moment so you can hear what Tom is saying.
We offer a wide selection of custom heating jackets in our QFX line. We invite you to take a closer look at our innovative system.
Okay, so Tom stops talking here, and then he moves into the next sentence where he's inviting folks to take a look at their product line. Well, he also talks about that here in the next clip. So I had edited that out. In this case, I used a standard trim edit for that. It was okay to have a little gap here because I have a graphic over the top of it that actually bridges these two. So we never actually see Tom disappear. He just stops talking for a few
We offer a wide selection of custom
moments.
heating jackets in our QFX line.
And then we go into the outro here. All right. So that's what we have going on with this particular item. Now, one of the other things that I have here is another edit to the audio. And I want to show you how this was created, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. This particular piece of audio, if you recall, was one long continuous piece. And what I wanted to do is have the audio basically fade out after the introduction here. And then once that happens, basically no audio there in the middle, and then pick back up here at the end. So to create that, what I did is I took the original file, and I'm just going to extend this out. Notice that is a non-destructive edit. That cut, all that media is still there. That music is still there. It's just been hidden or cropped away. So in this particular case, what I had done was I moved my playhead where I wanted. I targeted my piece of media. Now this is where I want this piece of media to say stop. And what I did was move my playhead to where I want it to stop, and then I used one of the other tools here in the toolbox. Over here to the left, there is a little razor tool. We use this to cut our media. And so I'll use that razor tool. I mouse over my audio track here. This is the audio 2, this is the music track, and cut right there. So what it did is it cut that piece of media into two pieces of media. And then what I did was I just moved it out here to the end. Well, in this case, I can also just delete it. So now I have the same piece of media, but I have the front piece here, and then I trim just the tail piece there. So basically I just cut this section out in between. And that's a very quick and easy way to have your audio just dissipate over the course of your file here. Now, let's take a listen here for just a moment.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now? How much in lost downtime?
Okay, so my audio is coming up here, but it's still too loud, okay? The music is still just playing over Tom. I can't really hear Tom for the music. So how do we make an edit like this? All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this first piece of media here, this first background music clip. Double click it. It opens up here in my source monitor. And in my source monitor, it marks it as an in and out point. So it's showing me, hey, there's still more media here. It's just you've hidden that. I remember I cut it and I disposed of it, but it's still there. I can still access it if I want. That's that non-destructive editing in place. So with this, I want to change this volume. Now, how do I change the volume? Right up here with the source monitor, I have a tab called Effect Controls. So I'm going to click on that. Now this will control various aspects of the piece of media that you have targeted. In my case, it's this audio clip. And so I have a volume control here. Okay. Now, not to dig into this too much, but there's a little stopwatch here beside level. Now level is the actual volume level here. I'm going to toggle that off. I'm going to click on the little stopwatch to turn it off. Okay. And then I'm going to click the little triangle beside that stopwatch, and I'm going to get this big slider here. Okay. I like using the big slider because it's a little bit easier to manipulate. Now I'm going to drag that slider to the left, and I'm going to drag it to about this position here, about 9.4, 9.5 dB. We'll see this right here. That's the amount that I'm reducing it. Okay. Now, because I turned off the stopwatch, it is affecting that entire media clip, okay? Every bit of it, including this little piece out here to the right. So, let's see what happens here.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now? How much in lost downtime would it save you if we could reduce that?
So now I can hear Tom, but I can also hear that music in the background. Awesome. So, I've lowered the volume overall. You can go in and have volume come up or down, and that gets into the effects. Okay? So you can modify these effects. Let's say that I want it to start out relatively loud and then get even lower. Okay? So first thing I'll do is I'm going to reposition my playhead. Now I'll take the playhead here, drag it all the way back to the very beginning. In my Effects Controls panel, there's also a little timeline up here, and it has its own little playhead. Does the same thing, just move it back to the beginning. And I'm going to increase this level once again. I'm going to just pull it up here a little bit. Oh, let's go up to about 7.5 or 6, somewhere along in here. Make it a little bit louder. All right. So that's setting the overall volume to that. Now, I'm going to come back over here to the level control, and I'm going to click on the stopwatch to toggle this animation. Okay? So we're going to animate the volume, basically change it over time. I'm going to move the playhead out. Oh, let's just go a couple seconds here. And then, right here, here's my level control. That's the volume that I'm at now, or the adjustment that I'm making now. And then to the right of that, there's a series of an arrow, a diamond, and another arrow. I'm going to click on the diamond. This is going to add a keyframe. Okay? And what it says is, okay, at this point in time, make a change. Okay? So what's the change that I want to make here? Well, I'm going to lower that volume again. So I'm going to lower this back. Now this time I'm going to go a little bit lower. I'm going to go like, I don't know, like almost 11. Okay? And what this is doing is now this volume is going to lower over time. Instead of just overall changing, it's going to lower over time.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
So it's getting quieter
How much
and
in
quieter.
lost downtime would it save you if we could reduce that number, say, by half? When was the last?
If you need to, you can go even lower with it. It's really up to you. You can drag components here to make it really low. I'm just dragging this little bar here to the right and making it really low, and basically just have that music kind of fade out. Okay. So that's just one type of effect that we can apply to an audio track, changing the volume. That's a very basic effect. Now, one of the other things that we can do, instead of using all of that control, okay, instead of using all of these little markers and things like this, all these little keyframes, I can basically just clear this out. So I can reset this maybe and turn this off, okay, just turn off the little stopwatch. That's going to reset it. The volume is back up where it was. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reduce the volume again overall just a little bit. Okay, so we're going to come down, let's see, we're going to come down around about 7. Okay. So now got one consistent volume. Okay, great. Here's where I can also use an effect. So something other than this volume effect. If I find my effects panel, now my effects panel is down here in the lower left-hand corner, down here with my project panel. I click on this, there's my effects. Now in my effects, I'm going to have things like audio effects and then audio transitions. So let's add an audio transition here. Let's add a little crossfade. I'm going to use the constant power, just drag and drop it right here on the very beginning of my audio clip. And so what that's going to do is it's going to add, oops, just zooming in here. It's going to add this little fade up effect, basically.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning?
So my music kind of fades up. If I need that to go a little longer, I can just grab the edge of this transition and drag it out. So now I have extended the amount of time for it to fade up.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
There we go. So that's a basic transition. Now you also have video transitions, and these are the ones we're most familiar with. So let's add a couple of transitions here, and let's wrap this project up. So I'm going to come over here to the video track. I'm going to click right there at the beginning of the video track, and then I'm going to right mouse click on that edge of the video track. When I right mouse click, I get a pop-up menu here, and I can apply a default transition. Now it is going to do two things for me. It's going to add, and I'm just zooming in here, a transition for the video and for Tom's voice. It's adding both of those transitions for me. So in this case,
how many of your steam traps?
We get a fade up from black, basically. Now, I'll do the same thing for an image. The little image that pops up there to the left of Tom, to our right, it just appears. It's just an abrupt click, there it is. So if I click on the left edge of it using the regular selection tool, I'm just going to click on the left edge of that. Then I can right mouse click and I can apply a default transition. Once again, I get another cross dissolve.
How many of your steam traps
you see how it fades in? It's great. Now the default value here is 1 second for this dissolve. What if you want that to be a little less obvious? Maybe you want to make it a little smaller. I'm going to double click on that cross dissolve for my image. Then I get this dialog, set transition duration. Now we're down to 1 second. Now I can't put in a half a second. I have to measure that in frames. So I know my video is 29 frames, 29.97 frames per second, roughly 30 frames a second. So if I want half of a second, I'm going to type in the value of 15. That's 15 frames. I tell it OK, and you can see my cross dissolve transition here has gotten much smaller. Let's see what it looks like.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
So we would continue this process of adding these dissolves to the beginning and the end. Okay, so I can just drag and drop. I'm just going to drag from my effects panel here. I'll find my video effects. Oops, I'm sorry, not video effects, video transitions. There's my dissolve. And I can use like a cross dissolve here. Drop here, and then I can also adjust that duration. Okay. What about other effects? Well, we can also apply these transitions between the video tracks themselves. So I've got a little cut here.
Efficient. QMax delivers the best.
Okay. And I'm going to mute this audio track for a moment. So we're jumping from here to here. Maybe we want a little transition in between. There are all types of transitions. Okay. There are page peels and slides and wipes and zooms, and it's really up to you what you choose. Basically, you just open it up. Let's do a good old-fashioned cube spin here and just drag this and drop it right onto that edit point. And now we'll get a little cube spin here.
Reliable and energy efficient. QMax delivers the
There you
best
go.
over.
Now, what if you decide that, well, cube spin, that's a little hokey for what we're trying to do here. How would I remove this? Well, you can select it and then hit delete. That'll remove it. Now, what if I have that there and I just say, well, I don't want to delete it. I just want to replace it with something else. So I've put my cube spin back, and let's say I want to go just to a standard dissolve. Let's do let's say a cross dissolve here. I can drag and drop my new transition right on top of my old transition, and it'll just replace it.
QMax delivers the best over.
Adding transitions. Do you have to do that? No, if you can make the nice cuts between clips, great. But those are very, very rare. And so usually you're going to add a simple transition, some sort of cross dissolve or fade or something like that, but then also reduce the amount of time. Notice that I had reduced those down to, say, 15 frames. I might even go less than that. It really depends on the frame rate of your video. Now, most video is going to be shot at roughly 30 frames per second, 29.97. But a lot of times we want a more film look, so we'll reduce that, maybe at 24 frames. Whatever your frame rate is, you can use that as your basis for your duration of your transitions. If you need those less than 1 second transitions or effects, just know you have to start going down into the actual frame rate itself and say, I need 15 frames rather than a half a second. All right, so that covers our transitions. Now we're rapidly coming to a close here, so we want to get into some of the other effects that we can apply, and then we actually want to publish this video. So let's jump into the next lesson here of adding more effects and controlling some of our video and audio. Video effects can be used to, say, change the color of your image, maybe the brightness, maybe you didn't have exactly the right lighting that you needed right there at the moment. So you can normalize the look of your video. Or you can use these effects to not only normalize it, but maybe take it over the top, give it an aged film look or a black and white look or some crazy off-the-wall look, whatever works for you. Effects can be applied to individual clips or across a whole group of clips. And we would want to apply it across a group of clips to be consistent. We want that consistent look. Now, if you're filming in the same location, that's pretty easy. It's when you're filming in different locations that it's going to require a lot more work because the video component there, the visual component, is going to be different. The lighting is going to be different. Now, once applied, you can edit your effects with the Effects Control Panel. We saw that in the previous lesson here, where I was actually using that to control the volume. You can also incorporate an adjustment layer, and that will give you an extra level of flexibility for adjusting the overall look of your video. All right, so what are we going to do here? We want to add an effect to a single clip. We want to add that effect to multiple clips, and we'll use the effect controls to adjust it. And if we have time, we'll take a look at an adjustment layer as well, and then how to remove effects. So now let's jump back over to Premiere. I'm going to open the next project. Let's come up here. Let's open up Lesson 8. Just bypassing all of my menus, and I'm going to locate my piece of media once again. Okay, so now in this particular one, I've added all of my transitions between my clips at the end and tails of all of my little popover elements here. I've added some transitions to my audio. Everything's starting to come together now. But now let's say I want to adjust the actual visual component here of, let's say, my recording area. What I want to do is I want to just navigate back here to the beginning here, the very first clip, four zeros and 8 there, the very first clip. All right, and then just take a look here in the program mode. Well, things look a little green there in the background. It's a white balance issue. Now there's several different ways to color correct this. I'm going to show you just one. Okay. So to color correct this particular item, I have it selected here in my timeline, down here in my sequence. If I go over here to my effect controls, we have some effects going on here. There's volume controls, panel controls, opacity, all kinds of cool stuff in here that we can use right out of the box. Now anything else we have to add to it, and that is going to require the effects panel. So let's go down here to the effects panel. Here I'm going to look at video effects, and there are just tons of them. One of those is color correction. Okay? So if I open that up, I can see there's all types of color corrections in here that I can use. It's really up to you. I suggest that you spend some time playing around with these different effects, maybe doing a little more research on what each of these does. It's more that I can certainly cover in this particular course. But what I want to do is just maybe add something like a brightness and contrast. That might work for me. I could also perhaps use this Luma curve. That could help as well. There's different ways you can go about this. So I'm not saying this is the right way to do it. I'm just saying this is one way to do it. So I'm going to drag this brightness and contrast and drop it right on my video clip here in my timeline. Just drop it right on top of it. And now we can see up here in the effect controls, I have a new brightness and contrast adjustment. It has two controls, brightness and contrast, just like the name applies. So let's say we want to adjust the brightness. Well, I just drag this little slider to the right, and if I look at my video over here in my program monitor, it certainly has gotten brighter. Okay? How much? Well, that's once again going to be up to you. If I adjust the contrast, I'm going to give a little more pop to this image. So I am going to adjust the contrast ever so slightly because I could see that when I adjusted the brightness, his shirt was getting a little more of a gray color than black. But that didn't really take care of that kind of greenish tinge in the background. Okay? So I can add yet another effect. I can come over here and look for one of my other effects. There is a tint maybe, but that actually adds a tint to it. The one that I really would like to use is called a proc amp. Now, where do I find that thing? Well, here's the nice thing about the effects panel. In the upper left-hand corner, there is a search feature. So if I know the name of it, I should be able to find it. So I'm going to type in proc, and then right here, video effects, adjust, proc amp. I'm just going to drag and drop that over here, and then I have yet another control here in the effects control. So here I can change things like the brightness and the contrast, and then the hue. And that's hue is probably what I'm more interested in here. I'm going to drag that. Let's see, let me pop this open. Now this one is a little different. It's not a shuttle, if you will, not a slider. It's actually a little dial here. So if I dial it to the left, you can see Tom is turning purple. So I don't want to go too far with it. I just want to go ever so slightly to the left here. If you need to, you can also highlight the value. Now I'm going in a negative value here. So let's do a -5. That takes out a little bit, maybe a little more. Let's take this up to say a -7. I'm going to do small increments here. I don't want to go too far with it. But basically I'm adjusting the hue. Okay? So just another effect that can be applied. You can compound this as much as you want. Now the more effects you have, the longer it's going to take to render, but that could give you the result that you're after. One of the other things that we can do with these effects is we can toggle them on and off temporarily. So let's see what this looks like if I turn off the brightness and contrast. If I poke the little FX icon here in the effects control beside brightness and contrast, you can see that adjustment being turned off over there in my program monitor. Very cool. So I can toggle it on and off just to see a before and after. But that is just one of the many effects that we can apply. So as you can see, applying effects is really just a drag and drop. You can add as many effects as you want. You can layer them on top of one another. The stacking order over there in the effects control does have, in some cases, a dramatic effect on the video itself. So if my proc amp was on top of my other color adjustment, and then I switch the two there in the effects control, I might get a different result. So you'll definitely want to play around with those settings. All right, so that gets us into the effects and how to apply those effects. Removing the effects is just as simple. One, you could just poke the little FX icon, just temporarily disable it. That way, if you're not exactly sure you like that, you can just leave it there, turn it off, and it won't render. If you decide that you do like it, you do need that effect, turn it right back on. Otherwise, select the effect, hit the delete key, and it will remove it. Now, how do we get this onto other clips? Let's take a look. So throughout this course of Tom talking here, we're in the same environment, okay? And so what I want to do is basically copy the effects that I applied to this first clip and apply them to all the others. So perhaps the easiest way to do this is to simply select the first clip right here inside of the sequence. Click on it, it lights up, it's selected, and then just use a standard edit copy command. So edit, copy. Now what did that do? That copied the video itself. So if I go over to the right and I select the rest of those clips, so I'm going to select this one, I'm going to shift select the other ones, because these are all of the clips that I want to affect. And I go back to the edit menu. Now a paste command would actually replace them with a different piece of video. That's not what I want. What I want is this, paste attributes. Here, I can choose which attributes that I want to apply. You can see I have all of my video attributes and all of my audio attributes. Well, I also have my effects in here. Well, I'm going to go ahead and replace them all, and so I'll just tell this OK. And now all of my videos will have that same brightness and tint adjustment to them, or that proc amp adjustment. So they will all be consistent throughout. So now that's your effects. Now there are other ways to apply effects. You can create what we call an adjustment layer. That's a little more than what we can get into here, but it would allow you to apply these effects to a separate track, and then that track would then filter down onto anything below it. So I could do the same thing. I could apply it to that one track and have it filter to all of the tracks below it and affect all of the media below it. All right. Now, the last thing we want to do here is, well, we've got all this kind of cut together. How in the world do we get it out so that we can share it to the rest of the world? We need to export this content. So let's take a look at actually rendering our content here. All right, so in this case, I'm just going to stick with the video that we have, and let's say we want to render this content as is. We want to basically publish it so we can share it in another application or put it up on our website. So what I want to do is I want to click here in my timeline. So I have the actual sequence open that I want to render. Right? Next, if I go up to the File menu, there is an export command down here towards the bottom. But there are lots of options here. Which one do we choose? Well, we choose the very first one. We want to export this media that we have selected, which is the entire sequence. This is going to bring up an entirely different dialog box. We get a little preview of our video here, and I'm going to shrink this down a little bit so we can see the whole thing. And we can see that based on the settings here to the right, this is going to be the result. Now, at the very bottom on the left-hand side, most importantly here is the source range. I'm going to set this to my entire sequence. Otherwise, I might accidentally trim off some of my video that I've worked so hard to string together. To the right, I'm going to choose a preset. Here's where I can choose different presets based on the format that I'm going to use. Now, the most universal format for me that I have found is this one. So right over here to the right, the very top drop-down menu is Format. I'm going to click on that and I'm going to choose this, H.264. This is an encoding method or format. And so with this one now, I'm going to click on the presets for this. Ooh, there's lots of them. This list goes on and on, folks. It is one of the more universal file types. So I'm going to use this, and let's say I'm going to publish this to my YouTube channel. So I'm going to navigate down here to YouTube, and you can see that I have various YouTube presets. So in this case, I'm going to say that I want to use YouTube 720. This is the lower end of the HD. It's HD, but it's not the real high-end HD. I'm going to use this. When I select that, it updates my preview, looks nice. I don't have any of the black bars, top and bottom, left, right, so it's the same aspect ratio. Everything looks good. The rest of these settings here were chosen for me based on that preset. So if you wanted to kind of filter through all of these presets and kind of look at what the settings are, you can certainly do that. But just note that this is going to work for what we want to do. The last thing we want to do is actually export this. Now you have two choices here. If you have more video that you need to edit, maybe there's a second half of this that we want to edit, I want to click on the Q command for that. It's going to put this video and all these settings into a queue, and it will be rendered at a later time. If I hit export, it's going to go ahead and start exporting it right now, which would tie up all of my processes and I couldn't edit my next video. So I'm going to click the Q command here, and this is actually going to bring up Adobe Media Encoder. And out of that splash screen just popped up there really quick and disappeared. But this is my preferred method because it's going to hand this off to another application here. And we can see that we have a couple of videos in the queue ready to be rendered. Okay, so I'm actually going to remove this one. And then here is my little video that we just finished. So I've got it ready to render. I'm going to have it start rendering. I'm going to start the queue, and it's going to start rendering this video. And we can actually see a little progress down here at the bottom. Okay, down here in the lower left, it's doing its thing. But now while that's doing that, I can come back to my project here and, hey, let's start maybe a new sequence. I can still work in this project. And I can start stringing together my next piece of media and let that media encoder just work on my video in the background. So depending on your workflow, how much video do you need to render? You may want to set this up and let it queue and just go ahead and go back to Premiere and start editing your next video. Now, if you have a lot of videos and maybe they're a little more robust than what we were working on here. This video is about 3 minutes long. It's probably going to take a lot more time, a lot more computing cycles. And depending on your computer that you're working on, things might slow down considerably. So what you may want to do is queue up your videos. You don't have to start the process, just queue them up. And at the end of the day, go back over to Media Encoder, hit the play button to start the encoding, and then go home or go to lunch, whatever it may take. Hopefully by the next time you come in and you check on your computer, all of your videos will be rendered, but that process does take a considerable amount of time. The longer your video, the more effects, the more adjustments that you've made, the longer that processing time is going to take. Well, that brings us to a close here on this particular course. I hope that gives you a relatively good foundation on how to get started editing your video, getting those media into your project, and then start stringing that media together. Well, until next time, this is William Everhart, and we'll see you again here at BrightStreamTV. Thank you, everyone.